Okay, Baltimore City Council Ways and Means Committee, we're back in session for City Council Ordinance 22-0235, Ordinance of Estimates for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2023. I'm Eric Costello, Councilman from the 11th District, Chair of the committee. I'm joined to my left, Councilman John Bullock, 9th District, Councilman Ryan Dorsey, 3rd District, member of the committee. To my right, Councilwoman Odette Ramos, 14th District, Councilwoman Felicia Porter, 10th District, Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, 6th District, member of the committee, and Councilman Robert Stokes, 12th District, member of the committee. I'm also joined by Matt Peters, staff to the committee. On behalf of Mayor Brandon Scott is Nina Themelis. On behalf of Council President Nick Mosby is Nate Poole. We are here for the Department of Housing and Community Development. Commissioner Kennedy, before we get started, how many slides do you have? You can eyeball it.
I think it's only like 16.
16, excellent. I'm going to ask you to keep your presentation to 20 minutes. I know that our colleagues are all very familiar with the great work you're doing, but are very eager to get into questions. Before we begin, those that are speaking are welcome to take their masks off. I'm going to ask that you keep your mouth about one hand away from the microphone. Inevitably, someone here today is going to screw that up multiple times. Each time I am going to politely interrupt you and ask you to speak into the mic. That is for the benefit of the people that are watching from home and so that we can have this hearing recorded on Charm TV on the YouTube channel. Commissioner, I also want to recognize Deputy Mayor for Community and Economic Development, Ted Carter. Thank you for being here, Deputy Mayor. Commissioner, before we begin, I'm going to ask you to introduce each one of your staff that are here with you today, first and last name and position title, and then please take it away with the presentation.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. Chairman Costello, members of the committee, and members of council. I'm pleased to be with you this afternoon to review the administration's budget for the Department of Housing and Community Development. I'm joined today by several members of our team. So I'd like to introduce Deputy Commissioner Jason Hessler, who's with us. See, they already know to raise their hand. This is fantastic. They're fantastic, I'm telling you right now. Deputy Commissioner Eric Booker, Deputy Commissioner Nicole Hart, Deputy Commissioner Kate Edwards, and he's not here with us, but I'm going to give him a shout out. Deputy Commissioner Steve Janes is watching us from home, and Deputy Commissioner Steve Janes is retiring this month. So he got a pass on joining us today for the last budget hearing, but I do just want to take a moment to recognize all of the work that he's done for the city for over 34 years and the countless budget hearings that he has participated in overseeing our consolidated planning and CDBG program. Also with us today is our Chief Fiscal Officer, Elaine Harder. Our Chief of Strategic Communications, Tammy Hawley. Our Legislative Liaison, who does a fantastic job, Stephanie Murdoch. Our Senior Advisor to the Commissioner, Stacy Freed. And also joining us from watching at home is our Chief of Policy and Research, Kimberly Rubens, who just couldn't join us today. And also with us, we also have Mylena and Erica Yates. So we have Assistant Commissioner Erica Yates and also our Director of Ombudsman Services, Mylena Beeds Johnson, is with us this afternoon. So before I get into the presentation, I just want to state how proud and humbled I am to work with the entire DHCD team. I believe that over all of the employees, over 390 employees that we have within DHCD are committed and dedicated public servants to the city of Baltimore. I will also lead with that, we are all human. So there is no perfection in my eyes, but everybody strives to make progress, and they all know within the agency that if something is on our side of the street, we'll be the first to say that it's on our side of the street, and we'll do everything in our power to correct it, to make it right, and to do what we can to better serve the citizens and the residents of Baltimore City. We consistently, do a lot of work within the agency. Before COVID, we averaged over 40,000 permits that we process a year. We're just over 37,000 permits this year, and we anticipate to hit 40,000 this year. We conduct tens of thousands of inspections. By the time you count both code enforcement inspections and building inspections, we process and serve hundreds of grants to residents, and we complete and process hundreds and hundreds of applications for our residents. So I couldn't be, like I said, more proud of the work that DHCD does on behalf of the constituents of this city. And with that, we'll get into our presentation to go over some of the highlights of our budget for fiscal year 2023. Let's see if I can get the clicker correct, as well as maintain appropriate distance on the microphone. So our first up is our community support projects. This specifically covers two different activities in this project. It's our community development block grant funds, as well as our community catalyst grant program. The operating budget for this maintains a $2.3 million in general fund support for our Community Catalyst grant program on the operating side, which provides operating grants, and then also on our capital budget, that provides the funding for the CCG, Community Catalyst capital grants as well. We also have $8 million in CDBG operating budget awards, which are granted annually for both our agencies, city agencies such as Rec and Parks, Mayor's Office, Homeless Services, etc., Health Department, and then also to community organizations across the city. I do just want to highlight one thing. The federal government has been delayed this year in providing their budget for the next fiscal year. So what we consider to be CDBG year 48, everybody, the community organizations have submitted their applications for CDBG 48. We've reviewed those applications. We only just received our allocation from the federal government about 3 weeks ago. And we now need to go through the process of a comment period on the annual action plan, putting that out and so forth. So there will be some delay in getting the CDBG 48 grants out on the street, but I want to preempt that with saying that in this instance, that is due to the late decision on the federal government budget, not on our side. I also want to just highlight that for that year, we did receive a 3.61 decrease from HUD for the CDBG total budget that comes to the city. So we've had to make some adjustments in the annual action plan and take that into consideration over the last couple weeks to get that ready to go out on the street. Next program that we're going to talk about is our service number 604, which is our before and after care program. This serves children at both Northwood and Waverly. Total capacity of 80 students. The budget maintains the current level of service. I do want to give recognition to the Department of Recreation and Parks. Director Moore and his team did a great job assisting us with Northwood this year. We had an unexpected retirement and needed to ensure that we could continue service and serving the children since January, and Rec and Parks stepped in to help us out there, and I want to make sure that I commend them for helping out their fellow agency on that. Our next service is 737. This is our administration budget. It's responsible for the daily operations of DHCD, which includes everything from human resources, our budget and accounting, our facilities management, communications, our information technology, and essential support for all the various divisions through the agency. We did transfer one position that out of this, out of the administration budget to Service 749, which is our property acquisition, disposition, and asset management service as part of like an agency realignment that we're doing, and to provide additional assistance in that service number. And also, you know, we are participating in the Future of the Workplace pilot and other items. So also this removes some funding that had been in the budget previously for office furniture that is no longer needed. 738, Service 738 is our weatherization service. This service provides energy efficient home improvement to low-income residents across the city of Baltimore. It is within our Division of Homeownership and Housing Preservation and works in conjunction with our lead hazard reduction program and our Office of Rehabilitation Services to help provide weatherization and to provide more energy efficient, clean, and healthy homes for our residents. The budget maintains the current level of service. Significant amount of this budget is actually grant funded through different grants that we receive from the state of Maryland, which are passed through from the federal government. This also includes the fiscal year 23 budget includes the $4.5 million in funding for what's the Empower State Grant, which is a 3-year grant program to help make households eligible. You know, we know and are aware that we did not meet our targets for this program. A lot of that was directly related to COVID for the fiscal year of 2021, but the program is back up and running. We've also had some challenges hiring qualified staff for this program. There are technical requirements and technical certification requirements required for our building inspectors to be able to do the necessary energy audits, et cetera. So we are actively recruiting and working, and this is something that isn't just here in Baltimore City. We've been in conversations with the state of Maryland and the entire kind of state, the other weatherization services and programs across the state, and everybody's been having challenges getting qualified staff with the certifications necessary to complete these energy audits and do the work, and also on the quality control inspections, which we're required to do as well. So while we did not meet our targets for fiscal year 21, and we'll also be off for some targets for fiscal year 22, we are actively working to bring everybody back online. Just so you know, an energy audit does take about anywhere from 3 hours, or could be as long as sometimes 5 hours in a house. So, you know, when dealing with the pandemic and so forth, plus there's a lot of blowing air, we had to make sure that we were, you know, in line with all of, you know, the COVID protocols to not just protect our staff, but also to protect the inhabitants of the house and our residents during COVID. So we have gotten all of that in place and are starting to get back out there and are actively recruiting. We've reached out on a national basis to national organizations as well. Our next service center is Service 740. This is the Dawson Center, which is specifically located at Preston Street. The fiscal year 2023 budget actually recommends transferring the Dawson Center service to Recreation and Parks. What this does is, for the service itself, in terms of providing summer camps and youth before and after care programs and so forth, it aligns the service with the missions of the agencies in terms of aligning those pieces. In terms of the physical building at Preston Street, DHCD will still be responsible for the physical building at Preston Street. Right now, there's like a teen center that is activating at the Oliver Center, kind of on Federal Street. That remains. This maintains the current level of service. Dawson Center is funded through Community Development Block Grant. There is no reduction in service. The service remains the same, and we'll be working in partnership with Director Moore over the next several months to ensure a smooth transition on that program, and there will not be a reduction in service in any way to the children and the families within the community that use the Dawson Center. And we are actually also excited because we will be coming up on the 20th the 20th anniversary of the fire bombing that occurred, and we are putting together programming that will be occurring where I'm completing a walkthrough of the building. We're identifying things to refresh the building on Preston Street. We'll be painting, we'll be doing things to kind of revise that building as well in combined efforts with Rec and Park. So we will be prepared and ready at Preston Street to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the tragedy that occurred and ensure that the children and families within Oliver still have that significant resource for their families.
Commissioner, if you could just pause there for a second. Bob, just a heads up, I want to, when we get to questions, please be prepared to talk about how Dawson Center is programmed within BCRP. Please and thank you. Please, Commissioner.
Our next service is 742, which is promoting homeownership. This provides our grants and forgivable loans to home buyers and our homeownership incentives. They're used for down payments, closing costs, et cetera. It continues. We have a couple of general fund positions that we're reclassifying within this to assist in terms of better aligning for the work that we do, from real estate agent work to more loan processing and loan servicing, given the nature of the work. Also, we are slightly below the target for this. I will say that one of the things that we've noticed is that given the housing market over the last couple of years, especially in the last year, the housing market being so tight that it was really difficult. There's a shortage in terms of inventory across the city, so we have some less transactions, and it's also more competitive. So some people that would normally be out purchasing properties, given the tighter market, we have a slight reduction here in terms of the number of incentives that we've provided. We also just announced in the last month that our what used to be our community development block grant incentive is now the first-time homebuyer incentive, and we increased that incentive from $5,000 to $10,000 to support down payment and closing costs for residents below 80% AMI, and we anticipate that this will also assist as we move forward in the housing market we're in to help as many residents as possible. Our next service is Service 745. This is our housing and code enforcement. It's responsible for providing the safe and attractive and livable neighborhoods across the city through the investigation and enforcement of our building, property maintenance codes, and related codes. We are in the process of upgrading technology within the Department of Housing and Community Development. This recommended budget also includes $57,000 in one-time funding for tablets and protective cases for our housing code inspectors, special inspectors as well, that will allow for more efficiency and effectiveness from our field operations, and tying in with some of the work that we're doing to update the systems that we use across the agency. It also has an additional $10,000 associated with the printing costs that are tied to the vacant dwelling signs that comply with the council bill that requires the notice be posted on the vacant buildings across the city. Our next service is 748. Wait, I missed one, sorry. This is our registration and licensing and contractors, 747. This is our service that registers our license, both multifamily dwelling, and then our short-term registration, our vacant building registration, our short-term licensing, and our rental licensing programs. This includes a reduction of around $93,000. This is where across the board within this service for printing services and reduced printing costs because of the increased use of online for this, we've actually took the 3% cut that we needed to take in the agency, this was one of the areas within the service that was able to take that for components that are not needed now because of the increased online nature of this service. And overall, the budget maintains current levels. Our affordable housing, which is 748, this covers not just the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, but this service also covers our home funding, our home program funding, which is HUD provided funding source, and federal kind of block grant to support our affordable housing for low-income residents across the city. So the home funds are provided on a competitive basis. We did not do a home NOFA this year due to the fact that we've actually are committed on home funds for this year for projects that are occurring across the city. And we have received a $15 million allocation, which was noted in the capital budget from the federal government for home ARP funds, which are related to the Federal Rescue and Recovery Act. And we're working in conjunction with the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services on programming those home funds, which will help support the construction and development of affordable housing projects across the city with a specific focus on permanent supportive housing, which is a need that we have when we think about our population experiencing homelessness in the city and how to make that rare and brief and non-reoccurring. So, that will be something that you'll see. We're working on the necessary steps to finish our public comment periods and outreach required by HUD around that, but you'll end up seeing kind of some NOFAs starting to come out. We anticipate probably around the first of the calendar year next year for that. Our next service is 749. There we go. This is our property acquisition, disposition, and asset management. This, for those that have been around on the council, this was formerly our blight elimination, but it was renamed in fiscal year 2020 to better align with the actual work that is done within this. So one thing I do want to highlight as part of this budget line item is that there is an additional $800,000 in this service that is under pending personnel actions. That is a direct result from a recommendation from the mayor's 30-day vacancy review, and that pending personnel for $800,000 will support the hiring of additional in-rem attorneys and in-rem paralegals to support our efforts to ramp up with in-rem tax lien foreclosure. It also has $500,000 in payments to subcontractors, et cetera, which is also part and comes out of the 30-day vacancy review memo to help support what we need to do to pay for additional appraisals, special title work tied to donations, property donations, which are a little bit more in depth than the other title work we do, and also increasing with some special title work, which our in-house title attorneys would not be able to do as well. I also, for this service, also want to note that there's also an additional paralegal that was funded from our enhancement proposal, and that is tied to title work. An additional 2 attorneys that is tied specifically to title work in-house, which will help us expedite. And then another position that was tied to our enhancement proposal, which is going to be a permit liaison to help support our smaller developers, emerging developers, and those that are purchasing properties from the city to move through any permitting and et cetera, so that we can assist as best as we can to move those properties from vacant buildings to getting their use and occupancy permit. Our next is our 750. This is our housing rehabilitation services. This is primarily funded through our community development block grant program. And this provides our low income residents across the city with grants and loans to help with repairs on their properties. We did not meet our target. That was due to COVID, but we are up and running and will continue to execute as best as we can. This also partners with our Housing Upgrades to Benefit Seniors program, is the lead service that is tied to that, and our partnership with our nonprofit organizations across the city. Next is 751. This is our building and zoning inspections and permits. This has, the same kind of one-time funding for our building inspectors for technology, but continues kind of same level of service. 752 is our community outreach services. This is the service that has kind of our 24-hour emergency response, ombudsman, conflict resolution, as well as kind of social services support. And I just want to note that the activities in this service are, some of the activities are under Deputy Booker on the emergency management side, and then some of the activities are under Deputy Nicole Hart on the social services side as it relates to this service. And then kind of wrapping up at the end is our Service 754, which is our summer food service program. This program is completely funded by the state, Maryland State Department of Education, which is a pass-through from the federal USDA. And we will continue to run this program again this summer with mobile meals routes and providing the necessary meals to children across the city so that they have access to food when school is out. And with that concludes our overview of the key highlights from the budget.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'd like to acknowledge Councilman Z. Cohen, 1st District, and I think that covers all of our colleagues' introductions. Also acknowledge City Administrator Chris Shorter. Commissioner, first item is a information request that I'm sending over. You are copied on it, as well as Deputy Commissioners Hessler and Booker, and Ms. Murdoch, as well as our normal crew from the Council President and the Mayor's office. It's a request from Councilman Burnett, specifically around the bandit signs topic, which I know is of great interest to everyone. So I sent that over. If any of you could please Steph, if you could please take a look at that and just review it to make sure that makes sense. If it doesn't, please let me know and I'll get clarification for you right away. That was the first thing. The second thing, before I go over to Councilman Bullock, Mr. Shorter and Deputy Mayor Carter, while you're here, Deputy Mayor Carter is very familiar with this because he's been in the weeds on it with me. But Mr. Shorter, I want you to know how deeply appreciative I am of Commissioner Kennedy, the way she has stepped up on a project in Upton on the 800 blocks of Harlem Ave and Edmondson Avenue. Having the second largest urban redevelopment project in the country in my district in Port Covington. This project, I have given more attention to this project than Port Covington. This project is incredibly, incredibly important. It's a 38 townhome project, full gut rehabs. Commissioner Kennedy has stepped up in more ways than I can or would care to recall. We have been having, at my request, utility work coordination meetings monthly for a little over a year. We haven't met the last couple months because we kind of had some homework items for the agencies and utilities to accomplish, which everyone's been working on diligently. But as you can imagine with any project, we have hit roadblock after roadblock. And when bringing those issues to Commissioner Kennedy's attention, her team has figured out how to navigate those in a very expeditious manner. And specifically worth mentioning is Deputy Commissioner Edwards, who has been intimately involved in that project. Everything from high-level financing to dealing with a water service at 842 Edmondson Avenue that we've been dealing with for months. Deputy Commissioner Hessler stepping up to have I guess we call it a party wall repaired. And most importantly, out of anyone who's not here is Bill Berge. But the process that we stepped up, and I appreciate Deputy Mayor Carter's leadership and knowing this project is also a priority for Mayor Scott, I think is a very effective process. And if it's something the administration would like to consider in the future, I would be happy to discuss how this process could be replicated citywide for projects that the city is subsidizing. This project includes, it's about a $10.5 million project that includes about $1 million of state subsidy and $2.2 million of city subsidy in a very creative financing structure. And the long story short is it required the reconstruction of an alley and relocation of water service, relocation of utility poles, and installation of cameras to prevent illegal dumping. And without Commissioner Kennedy and specifically her leadership and support, we would not be in the place that we currently are. So I just want to publicly acknowledge those efforts and let you know that we have a process, and I think that process is very effectively working, and we're kind of moving the chains on this one. So just want you to be aware of that, and want to thank you, Commissioner, to you and your team. With that, I'm going to jump over to Councilman Bullock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Commissioner, and the team as well. I know we do a lot of work together, and I do appreciate it. So first question is a budget-related one, and next one's operational. So from the budget side, you'd mentioned a reduction in federal funds this year. So can you talk about the rationale behind that, and then do you anticipate that being an ongoing issue?
I cannot speak to the rationale of the federal government for making that decision. So I will have to defer that to our federal budget. So this is based on the federal budget and the federal budget to HUD that was passed, and then how that works to support the Community Development Block Grant Program. And this is the first year in a number of years that there has been a cut across the board. And it's 3.61%, which is not huge, but it is an impact because it's an impact of around $880-some thousand. So what we've done is had to look at not just the kind of city programs and city services, but also different applications that we got from our nonprofit partners and kind of adjust some across the board. But we had an anticipation that it was possible this year to see a cut on the CDBG program. So we started doing math several months ago so that we could be somewhat prepared, but still have to make those adjustments.
I appreciate that. And the other question, I know we deal with this a lot. Everyone knows that the issue of vacant property in Baltimore is significant, particularly on the west side and 9th District. And I know we've had a number of collapses and some emergency demos. Can your team talk about the resources on hand and that which would be needed to address this problem in a more holistic fashion? So
we can talk, in terms of demolition, that is covered in the capital budget. It is a tight capital budget to be able to look at everything that we have to do addressing vacant properties in the city. Mayor Scott, CAO Shorter did outline, some of the information in terms of knowing what we're facing in terms of the larger problem of vacancy and vacant homes across the city. I think we recognize that it is, something that takes a significant amount of capital. We've put forth some recommendations for consideration. There isn't, an exact plan on that, but we do have resources available. We have seen an increase in some ways of some of the emergency demolitions, but that's also not just from collapses, but also our inspectors on a regular basis doing inspections and catching items. And at this point, we are having to move some funding from what would be our whole, like a normal kind of demolition process with planned demolition into the emergency budget to be able to cover some of the emergency demolitions.
Thank you so much. And I know code enforcement is a big part of all this too. So I know you'll have some commentary as well. I know the rest of our colleagues understand the integral relationship there. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Councilman Stokes.
Commissioner Kennedy, I just want to talk about your permitting process because it's real frustrating. And can you kind of walk us through that? Because I'm sure my colleagues and sitting here, people are frustrated about the permitting process. Some developers, business owners, by the time they get to the permitting process, they almost out of business. And we got to do better in terms of being customer friendly. So can you kind of walk us through that? And there's nothing against employees, but for somehow, the only way we can get it done is once the developer, whoever it is, that already applied for the permit, it's 2 or 3 months before they hear anything. And the only reason why it get done right away, because they call one of the councilmen or councilwomen sitting here, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, there you go, we got to send it off and take care of it. Why is that still happening? And the reason why I'm saying that, we know we had COVID. You working from home. It's almost like when I call, I can't even get nobody to answer the phone. And that's sad in the city when we continuously have the same process. If you working from work, but when you home and you still can't get nobody, you still don't, nothing's happening. And I'm just real confused about your permitting process. So can you kind of take us through that process to see where that is? Because if it's still the same way, there need to be some changes, really.
So I'm going to speak to a couple different things on that, and then I'll turn it over to Deputy Hessler to talk a little bit more. But one thing that I want to note is that we do, as of, I think as of May 2022 so far, we have successfully, processed, let's see, we've issued and processed 37,135 permits across the city. So there are permits that are being applied for and issued within 24 hours, within 48 hours, within 72 hours. We know, and 99% of all of those permits are issued and done online. So we have over 37,000 permits that have been processed to date for this fiscal year. We anticipate by the time we catch up on the May numbers and the June numbers that we should be close to 40,000 permits for this fiscal year that have been applied for and processed within the city of Baltimore. I'm not saying that it's a perfect process. I'm saying that all of us, and Deputy Commissioner Hessler and I have had significant conversations on this. I've talked with the staff about this. We know that there are some places and some areas where we can do better. And we are, and we're planning for that. One of the things that we put in for ARPA funds, and we did receive an allocation in the mayor's $100 million allocation of ARPA, there is a line item specifically to help support new online software to help, because of having everything move online. I'm going to say we processed 99% of those 37,000 permits were processed online. We are going to be upgrading to a different system even, which will make that processing even easier than it has been for people that do apply and do get permits issued in a timely basis. And I'm not saying that there aren't some people that do have some issues with the system or working through things, and we recognize that, which is why we've recognized that we need to actually switch to a different system. So we received the funding allocation for that. We've been actively working with BSIT and with staff to review all of the current workflows within the permitting system. So we've been doing that background and kind of analyzing workflows. I also want to remind everyone that DHCD, the permitting process, is a hub and spoke. We are the hub and there are spokes. And those spokes go out to our fellow agencies such as Department of Planning, Health Department, DPW, DOT, police, fire. I might be forgetting somebody else at this moment, but they go out to all those spokes. And then those spokes also have pieces and parts to the process as well. And sometimes they receive and have some delays on their end. But we recognize that the system that we are using, we're gonna also be able to have better communication with those folks. And we're also gonna be able, with the new system, be able to have some better tracking mechanisms to really know, like, well, how many days is it out at this, spoke before it comes back. So I just wanna highlight that we process a significant number of permits a year. Majority of those permits are issued within, I would say, 72 hours, maybe 4 days. Majority of those permits. Yes, there are some issues where we need to kind of move some things along. We're very responsive when those, come to our attention. We have been working throughout COVID in terms of some of the remote phone system. We've been talking with BSIT and MTE on, well, it's now not MTE anymore, but on like fixing that in terms of just responsiveness. So we recognize that it's not perfect, but like I stated at the beginning of my testimony, we will absolutely know that we will make progress to get it to be where, we reduce and continue to reduce the number of issues that people do have. And with that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Hessler if he has anything else to add.
Jason Hessler, Deputy Commissioner for Permits and Litigation. I don't know that I have all that much to add to what Commissioner Kennedy stated there. Our focus is on, in the upcoming year, working towards a new system that'll be more user-friendly. I think that that's where a lot of our communication issues occur, is that the existing system is not as user-friendly, makes it difficult for contractors, property owners, and the like to get through the permitting process without having questions. We're not just sitting back and waiting for that system. In April, we had 4 online sessions that were recorded and are available online. They were training sessions for applicants on how to apply for different permits. We have a 5th session in the works that is specific towards rehabbing vacant buildings, 1 and 2 family dwellings that are vacant. So we think that will help build a better customer while we build a better system. And between the two, that should resolve a lot of the issues in communication as far as the time it takes to get a response back, phone answering, emails, message board.
Thank you, but I'm glad to hear you're getting some new software. Maybe that's the problem. They got some old software. And Deputy Commissioner Hessler, he know that I'll call him, he do respond, and your staff do respond. It's just when you get emails from people that are doing business in the city and it continues to be the same thing over and over, we got to change that and make it better for our customers. My second question is about the Dawson Family Center. We know what happened to that family 20 years ago, and I'm glad we have our Deputy Mayor here, Ted Carter, and our CAO, because back then, Pam Carter, who one time used to sit in the city council, who ran that Dawson Family Program. And it's very unfortunate and disturbing that some of that money got cut. That don't happen in all neighborhoods. There's no way in the world that program should have got cut. Congressman Elijah Cummings, who really put a lot of effort in there and put that money into that program, and for that to be cut for those young people and those families, it really bothered me, and I'm sure it bothered other people in the community. So my question would be one, and Bob will get this question too. Why don't we restore the kind of funding back in that building for our young people and the families that we talking about? Mental health issues, we talking about giving young people opportunity, giving families opportunities. Why can't we go back to that and look at that funding that was there that should not have been cut, but it was cut? The bottom line, it was cut. I think that funding should be restored back. I know we still have the funding from the last couple of years that's there, but I'm talking about the funding when they opened that building up. That money should have never been cut. Absolutely. And I was not sitting here as a council person, but I raised a lot of noise about that because that was insulting to the people in the community and to the Dawson family. It was very insulting, and they called me, and it really bothered them that that funding got cut because it was something that Ms. Dawson and her family now not around because she took a stand. So my question is, what is the level of funding that we can put back in that program?
Well, just to be clear, the funding was moved because the operation we thought was better served under Rec and Park. So
I'm not talking about that.
what are
The
you
funding for that was cut. I ain't talking about nothing moving from the Rec and Parks. They cut that funding maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I guess. That's the funding I'm talking about, Bob. I know what you're talking about.
So what I'll say, I'm not aware of what the previous funding level was. So what I can say is I will go back and do the research to see what the previous funding level was. This program is 100% funded by community development block grant funds. So I need to see what the previous funds were, how that compares to where the funding level is now, and then as I just stated, the CDBG program as a whole was just reduced by the federal government, so we can't commit. I mean, we still have the service, and like I said, I've committed. We're going to be doing the work that we need to do on the building. We're going to be, sprucing that up and doing that piece of it. But what I can say is I will go back, I'll look to see historically what the funding level has been, and then be able to provide an analysis of how that compares to where the funding level is now.
Okay, and real quick, I don't want to drag this out, but Mayor Scott gave you $100 million. I hope that a lot of that money could be put back in that funding, and this is a request for Nate and Nina, restore that money that was back in that program. That's a shame. And if you got $100 million and we talk about investing in our young people, investing in our community, you can't invest it if you keep cutting it. So that's the request that I have. The mayor gave housing $100 million. Some of that money should be back over in the Dawson Family Center. And real quick, we and Ms. Hart, you're doing a wonderful job, but we got to stop doing assessments on city-owned buildings every 5 years. That's why the Dawson family got a problem, because we let it sit every 5 years. They got electrical problems, water problems, and other buildings in the city. And I just want to share that we cannot keep doing assessments on city-owned property every 5 years, and then you come back and tell the community, oh, we got to tear it down. So that's a different issue, but I just want to make sure that the $100 million that Mayor Scott gave to housing, that when we go back and look at that money that was at the Dawson Family Center, the funding that was cut, that money should be put back in that center, because them young people, you got 50 or 60 kids that come there and they looking for that center to be open. But the funding level is what we need to really do a lot of outreach, not just to the young people, but to their families. So Nina, Nate, that's my request. Deputy Carter, you here? CAO, that's where the money at. I'm glad both of y'all here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilman. I'm remiss for not mentioning Deputy Commissioner Hart earlier in my thank you comments about Harlem and Edmondson. Truly appreciate the actual on-site plumbing work that you've done and helped facilitate, literally. So thank you very much for your creative work to help move that project forward. Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy, and to your team. Wanted to first thank you for your support on the project in O'Donnell Heights. I know that's HABC more than you, but you really leaned into it, and I'm really grateful. We do not have a good history in this city of demolishing public housing and then rebuilding it. And so to be able to get that next phase going, I think is really meaningful. So thank you for that. I also want to start by thanking Erica Yates and Dave McGinnis, who are both extremely responsive, not just to me, but to our residents as well. That said, I am deeply concerned about our lack of capacity for inspections. This is a conversation you and I have had a few times, and I'm particularly concerned for our seniors. Many of our multi-family dwelling buildings that serve seniors are in poor shape and are not being well maintained, and I believe have some serious both structural problems as well as what's actually going on inside of them. Since April 26th, my office has reached out to DHCD 4 separate times with a data request. We have heard nothing back. So what I would like to know is a complete list of all multifamily dwelling buildings in the city of over 30 units, that are registered in the city of Baltimore. Again, we've asked it 4 times in writing and have heard nothing back. And so I don't know if you have that off the top, but that's my question.
Hang on. So we're looking for all properties that have an MFD license for greater than 30 units within the city.
Correct.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I do believe that we did respond to let you know that we had a meeting last week with BSIT, because that was something that we needed to do in conjunction with them in order to be able to pull that information. So we updated with that piece, and I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Hessler to give some background on where that stands. That was something that we could not immediately pull.
Yep, Councilman Cohen, we do have your request. We are working on it. It's not a piece of data that we can pull out of our system directly under our control, so we have to get it from BSIT, and then we need to put it into a framework and match it up with some other data to match up with your request exactly, and it's just taking a little bit longer than it should.
Okay. When can we expect that to be delivered?
I can get with the BSIT people this evening and get you an answer on that tomorrow.
Great. Again, April 26th is when we first asked, and so there's frustration that it's taken this long, but that would be very much appreciated.
Councilman, real quick, are you done with that one? I just want to summarize.
Yeah.
So all properties in the city that are licensed with an MFD license for 30 or greater units. Deputy Commissioner, do you?
The actual request that came across was a little bit more in depth than that, I believe, and there was a few additional pieces, which I think what the request was and what is actually needed are 2 different things as well. So we're trying to provide you the full response with everything that you would need to answer the underlying questions that you're getting at.
Okay, great. If you could do that, but I also do want to know specifically all the 30 unit and above.
That'll be in there. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
So, Councilman, can you do me a favor after you're done with your questions? Can you forward me that email so I'll make sure all the right folks in the right channels are on it? And Deputy Commissioner Hessler, at a minimum, by call of business tomorrow, if we're not able to provide the list of those 30 and above, if you could at least outline for us the steps that need to occur and an estimated time frame when that will be completed by. Councilman Cohen.
Thank you. So I want to go back to our lack of ability to inspect. I know that in the legislation that the previous council passed, we created a framework wherein folks can essentially buy an inspection for themselves after 1 to 3 years, or have one through DHCD. And I know there are some very, very significant capacity constraints within DHCD around inspections. So, Commissioner, I was wondering if you could share what our current capacity looks like around inspections, and then where do we need to get to in order to make sure we are in a regular pattern, we're not having folks skirt or skip, or even there have been some questions that we've received about whether some of the inspections that were done by third-party vendors were fraudulent. So I'm curious, in your mind, where are we now, and where do we need to get to in order to have a good enough system that meets the needs of our seniors and other families in Baltimore?
That's a good question. I would state that given how, and if we're specifically looking at the changes that were made in terms of our rental licensing law and MFD, that, given this, where the law stands and what is required, that DHCD is able to perform the inspections as required under the current law. And, there are some challenges as it relates to those inspections. In order to go into a unit, we have to have permission of the person that is in that unit to be able to go in. But in terms of capacity to do inspections that are required by us, we are able to complete those inspections. We're actively recruiting now for any of our open property maintenance inspectors. We have our apprentice program that Deputy Booker runs that hires for inspectors on that side. So in terms of what's required at this moment, I feel that we are able to perform the inspections as needed. We are willing, and I've stated before, to look at what other changes or what we need to do in terms of thinking about some conditions in buildings or residents where we need to be looking at how to best address those conditions and those inspections. I can't speak to the timing of when the changes were done in the legislation in terms of using the third-party inspector. But I can say that just off of, we would have to have a significant increase in the number of inspectors in the office to pull those inspections into DHCD and not using a third-party inspector. If we were to do that now, using our current staff, our current inspection staff would probably only be able to do those multifamily dwelling inspections and not do any of the other property maintenance and code enforcement inspections across the city. And, we're talking about, that's a team of, we're at what, 50? Yeah, 74. Yeah, we're at about 56 inspectors right now. We're hiring for this next cohort to bring it up to the 72. So we would probably need to bring on board an additional 50 plus inspectors if we were to think about pulling those inspections back into DHCD from a third-party inspector. And I'll ask either Deputy Hessler or Booker to add any other comments on that.
When we expanded to require all rental properties to be licensed, which expanded to include 1 and 2 families, that more than doubled the workload. About 50% of the rental properties in Baltimore City are 1 and 2 families. Prior to January 1st of 2019, the only time they were inspected was if a tenant called 311 to make a complaint or they filed a escrow action in district court. And so when we were working on that litigation, or that, excuse me, wrong hat. When we were working on that council bill, we did do some of the math there, and it was, I think, 160 inspectors would be needed to inspect all the rental properties needed. And so that's where we ended up going with the third-party inspections and the time frame that we had.
Yeah. And I would just say that there is a perception among the many in the affordable housing community, as well as many residents and particularly seniors, that we are not doing enough in terms of proactive inspections, and that certain landlords, and it is a small percent, are flouting our rules. And what I would argue is, again, not that we do everyone proactively. I understand the capacity constraints within DHCD, but that there is a percentage of which we really should have our eyes on, because I do think there are some, just like in anything, whether it's education or police or fire or something, you're going to have a group that is not doing the right thing. And I think that in the case of landlords, the consequences are pretty severe for our communities.
And I would say that the agency and the team between Deputy Booker's team on code enforcement, Deputy Hessler's side with SIU, that when we do know of someone, let's say, that is a bad actor in the community from a rental standpoint, that we are actively engaging either with that landlord or we are actively re-inspecting or visiting that property as best as we can, and to try to gain access to the units that may be troubling units within that dwelling, right? Like, we can go into the lobby, we can go into certain areas, we can look outside, but we cannot access individual units within a building unless that tenant in that unit gives us permission to enter that unit. So we do pay attention to bad actors. We do, proactively re-inspect, go back, try to make contact with as many tenants as possible. That sometimes it's difficult for tenants because they have fear of retaliation or fear of other things that come into play. But we try our best to work around that and find ways to hold the landlords accountable so that they are providing safe, habitable, living conditions for our residents, including our older adults.
No, and I appreciate that, but that's not systematized in any way, right? When we talk about
that it isn't systematized in that it's on a, that we know that this one would be a 6 months inspection versus like a year inspection or a 3-year inspection or something. It is based off of boots on the ground, knowledge that we have from the community, knowledge that we have from the tenants, knowledge that we get from members of the council, knowledge that we get from 311 requests, city constituents, our own knowledge of certain landlords as well. So it's not systematized in that it is, something that is happening. This building is, getting something every 6 months, but it is something that we know. And the team out there sometimes is actually, depending upon the building, they might be out there more frequently than even 6 months. They might be out there every month or every couple weeks.
I appreciate that. I do think this is something we as a council need to take a look at in terms of how do we create robust systems around inspections, but do appreciate the work that you all do. I know your team works extremely hard across the board, and for that, I'm grateful. So thank you, Madam Commissioner, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Council Vice President Middleton, and then Councilwoman Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I first want to thank you, Commissioner, you and your team. You continue to be, for the most part, very responsive, and you know that you do have one of the major redevelopment areas in the city, which is Park Heights, which has a large number of vacants, and we're just going through a lot of problems, and from grass cutting on. So I do appreciate everything that you try to continue to do. My first question also kind of geared towards inspections and citations, but my question comes from, I guess, a comment from DPW as we have been talking to different agencies. You did mention how your office has many spokes and is connected to so many agencies. And so this question is, as we enter the summer, DPW stated that they have to keep up with what the inspectors and citizens request. How much cleaning, how many work orders come from inspectors? Are you issuing citations, and how many? Because they are a part of, that process of what you start with.
Yeah, I'm going to actually ask Deputy Booker to address that, and I know this is something that he coordinates with DPW and the DPW staff on a regular basis as it relates to cleaning and boarding, high grass and weeds and mowing, and there's an internal SR practice for that. And this is something that our agency has also been working in conjunction with CAO Shorter and DPW and things on also kind of some coordinated inspections work as well. So I'll turn it over to Deputy Booker to talk a little bit about how that works.
Sure. Councilwoman, thank you for the question. Thank you for the question. My team responds from a service request standpoint. We respond to over 55,000 service requests a year. One thing that I am particularly proud of when it comes to the work orders that are requested, and actually that load that we have a tendency to put on DPW, like 34,000 work orders for cleaning and boarding are requested. Out of that 34,000, 29,000 of them come from the inspectors. So I'm pleased that like 83% of those work orders that are requested, I'm not happy about the burden that I put on DPW, but I am happy about the fact that 83% are in fact inspector initiated, which means that we are in front of the citizen on those requests, and that's something that we have been pretty consistent on.
Thank you. Thank you. And my second question, along with the lines for helping seniors in our city, and this, I guess, goes to the weatherization or rehab department. So we know that there's been a waiting list, backlog for more than 5 years. You're getting money to try to help with that. So with that waiting list, I'm assuming that the people on that waiting list have to reapply again, or they don't? Okay.
No, so they won't have to reapply. What they would need to do, we actually changed the process. So this is something we started actually when I was Deputy Commissioner for Homeownership and Housing Preservation, and Nicole was in her previous position, and Deputy Hart is now kind of taking this forward with that application process. We shifted the process so that there's almost like a pre-application, and that holds your spot on the waiting list, because what we found was that people were getting frustrated because they'd submit the application, and it was a full application, which includes all of the necessary documents, but depending upon the funding source, some of those documents have expiration dates, and if they've been on a list for a long time, then they're questioning, well, why do you need my tax returns again, or why do you need my updated bank statements? So they do not have to reapply. They have that pre-application that kind of reserves their spot, and then once it's getting closer to being able to kind of move to the next step, then we're able to go back to them and actually gather all of the necessary documents in a timely fashion so that we reduce anything that expires for any of the programs, because we're also trying to analyze not just for whether, like if they apply for weatherization, we also might need to do housing rehab services, which is a different funding source, different document. So we're trying to keep it as streamlined and effective and efficient, not just for staff, but mostly for the constituents, because we are a lot of times dealing with older adults. You know, we still do go out to their homes to assist with document collection. We have portable scanners. You know, we do our best to make it as easy for everyone as possible. So they will not have to do that, and we just try to collect it all at one time.
Thank you for that, because our older adults are the ones that are usually asking for that, you know, that weatherization program, and they usually call our offices for, you know, asking all these questions. So good, that's some reassurance that we can put out there as well. Thank you. Those are my two.
Thank you, Councilwoman Melton. Councilwoman Ramos?
I think Porter.
Oh. Okay, well, I'm going by the list in front of me, so.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to Commissioner Kennedy and the crew, several of whom are my constituents. Great to see all of you. I have several questions. I'm just going to stick with a couple at the moment. I sent ahead a couple, so I want to talk about those. The mayor's office and the city administrator might want to be in this conversation too. Sent out the memo that was generated after the 30-day review of vacant and abandoned property strategies. And I just sent it to my colleagues, so it's in your inboxes if you don't have it, if you didn't have it before. That spells out multiple strategies around how we want to eliminate vacant and abandoned properties through rehab or demolition. I'm grateful that a lot of my recommendations are in that memo. I'm wondering, without going through the whole thing, because we will have a hearing on it, I was specifically wondering about the items in the memo that are in the budget. And the commissioner you outlined in the beginning of your remarks that we had those enhancement proposals that were honored, which, by the way, I'm super excited about because that's huge. So maybe just sort of first go over, because I think the main sort of headline in that memo was this judicial in-rem process and the work that you're going to do there, but then also go into, like, what other specific things in the memo or in the budget? One of the reasons I asked that also is because there's actually a lot of money in that memo that I actually don't see in the budget. So how we sort of, what the plan is for that. So it's a lot of questions in one question.
So I'm going to just make a couple statements and then actually turn it over to either Director Senemy or CEO Shorter to make some comments specific to that. One, I'd say I'm just going to reiterate that 800,000 plus 500,000 in the budget is a direct result of the 30-day memo and the need to increase on the in-rem side because of that process and where we are with the court. And then also, we've been thinking about this, right? Like the tragedy that occurred with the 3 firefighters over on Stricker Street definitely, highlighted this, not, outside of the Department of Housing and Community Development in a way that has not happened before. And with the support of CEO Shorter and the mayor in terms of pulling people together to look at things. So, previous to the 30-day memo, we had already at DHCD been looking at all of the things that we need to do to kind of address vacancy in the city of Baltimore. And the title attorneys, which are, approved in the enhancement, the permit liaison, which is a huge piece of this puzzle, and the paralegal for title as well are included in that. I will also say that we do have it, funding. It isn't in this budget because it's funding that's allocated in a different capital budget, but we will be able to be looking at the ground rent. There's a suggestion in the memo around ground rent redemption program, which actually can assist in preventing vacancy, and we have that, and I have a set aside to do a small pilot program for that, and we will be working on getting that going. And then, overall, there's been recommendations made in the memo, but at this point, I am going to turn it over to Director Senemy and the CAO to talk a little bit broader.
Hi, good afternoon. So on the 30-day vacant review, so we did try to act as quickly as we could to take some of the recommendations and kind of get them into the budget where we had a little bit of
appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Funding availability. So we did take a look at that. The recommendations on the funding for especially like the impact investment areas and demolition and stabilization. I mean, I appreciate that the memo kind of puts some rigor into exactly how much would be needed by property. So it gives us some, information to, if we have a chance to make one of those investments, what it would get us. But we don't have the funding right now for the entirety of the memo. The way I look at this is we go through a budget process and we can prioritize money in certain areas or certain parameters within this memo, things that would be needed. But we don't at the moment have a funding source for those, and we don't think that this memo locks us into being able to fund those things. We've always known that it costs a lot of money to demolish buildings or stabilize or provide incentives. So to me, it's a framework, and I think it's a very helpful framework because it's the first time I've seen, kind of by investment impact area, I should say, impact investment area, that you can see here's the number of properties, here's actually, the cost that it would take to make a difference in those areas.
Yeah, it's a $3 billion problem that's actually outlined in the memo. So at some point, we've got to start making commitments for how we make that happen. Did you want to add anything? Okay. But going into that, part of the memo is what the commissioner talked about. I thought that when you look at the impact investment areas and the columns there on, I think it's page 4, not surprising that I've remembered all of this, that there's also home repair. It's my understanding that there is some money that's obviously allocated now for home repair and hubs and all of that. Is that integrated into those? No, okay.
No, so what's outlined on page 4 is the analysis for the zone 1s in the impact investment areas, that based on the block level planning, where we've literally gone block by block, looking at each parcel of a property. Is that parcel owner occupied? Is it non-owner occupied? Is it a rental? Is it a vacant property? Is it an unoccupied property that we're sending out for reinspection to see if it's vacant or not? It takes all of that analysis and then looks at the average cost that we know for tackling that based on the number of properties. So let's say, for Broadway East, for Zone 1s, we've identified a number of homeowner occupied properties, knowing, average cost that we're seeing go into some of those kind of in the 15,000 range, and knowing that we have that. We will be using some of the repair, like weatherization money we are targeting and working on applications, lead hazard reduction, housing upgrades to benefit seniors, office rehabilitation services. We are, working, right, to make the best targeted investments we can, while also knowing we have, people across the city that are in need of assistance. The mayor did allocate $15 million in ARPA funds to support the impact investment areas, so we'll be utilizing those funds. And in this year's capital budget, there is also money in the capital budget outlined for impact investment areas as well.
And that money is going to be for this. It's my understanding, based on all of our conversations, that you've had this sort of outline of how you wanted to work anyway, right? Because we know that vacant and abandoned properties has been a crisis in our city. To me, if we don't eliminate them, it would be a double tragedy. But also, so with everything coming up, you were able to just say, here's our plan. So that's really what this is. But it sounds like you've got some of the $15 million in the ARPA, and another allocation will be going to execute part of this plan.
Yes, that is correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think it's just and this is for the mayor's office and for the council. I think it's a well thought out plan. Obviously, I'm grateful to have been working with you on it. We need to really start dedicating the funds to make this happen. Because to me, we have 70% of our violent crime is happening in areas where there's vacant properties. To me, it's part of our crime fight. And so I want to make sure, and I'll be happy to, I've already committed to working with the administration on figuring out how we're going to get this money. We're not going to get $3 billion all at once, but we've got to be able to get it and make sure that your office and your department has the capacity to do what needs to be done. But also that we're able to, work with communities on this as well. So following up on that, on page 7, Service 749, and on page 275 in the budget book, this is for property acquisition disposition. It seems to me, I know you probably submitted this to BBMR prior to the extensive work we've been doing on setting up the NREM, but it seems to me like the targets for property acquisition are low. would you say, because with the new in-rem process, if we get it right, which I'm confident we will, this number is going to be a lot higher?
Correct. So we submit all of the target information. We have to have that submitted into we do that by September, correct? August, like in September. So that does not reflect the change that has occurred most recently with in-rem and that acquisition. Also for the fiscal year 21 target and the fiscal year 22 target that we're in right now, we did adjust those numbers down. Staff adjusted those targets back, when we were entering our targets, because we anticipated a lot of those acquisitions are impacted by court closures and COVID, and we had been seeing reductions. So that's why the target is lower. We are actually, the 21 target was 100. That's why the target was low, because we were taking in consideration those closures and so forth. But we actually exceeded that target and ended up acquiring 248 properties in fiscal year 21. Once, we have some things under our belt over the next couple of months, by the time we readjust targets for fiscal year 24, in September, we anticipate that those targets will be going back up.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing that and working with you on that, because it's also my understanding that we're not only just working on creating this judicial in-rem system, but actually moving properties from an older system, the tax lien system, where we'd have to have the certificate and then foreclose, which takes 2 years or more. So we're taking some of those cases out and going into the in-rem. So these numbers should be like 500, 1,000. I think we've got to be ambitious here, because this is such a big deal. And then making sure we've got the dollars to be able to do something with the properties after you have them.
Yeah, I'm going to say that it's all intertwined with a number of different pieces. So
for sure.
We have property acquisition, then, when we're doing the analysis now in the impact investment areas, we're analyzing what potentially had, been identified for a different type of acquisition to what would qualify for in-rem tax lien foreclosure, doing that analysis. And then also, we have to have the developers on the other side, or the homeowners, because you can also be a homeowner and purchase a property from us to renovate as you would like to. But homeowners, developers, whoever on the back end is going to be purchasing that. And we've had conversations with the Department of Planning, with Deputy Mayor Carter, because also this ties into our population growth goals and so forth, because we can be acquiring properties for renovation, but need to have the developers on the side to do this. We need to have a mix of affordable homeownership options, affordable rental options for the redevelopment, mixed income options for the redevelopment, and then also need to be thinking about population growth, because otherwise we're just shuffling some people around the city.
Sure.
And at some point we're going to end up, if we're not smart and thinking forward on how this works, we'll end up with an inventory of properties and then, need to kind of take that in consideration. Also, we're thinking ahead because we know interest rates have gone up. That impacts, not just the cost of borrowing to the end homeowner or, investor who's going to be using the property at the end, but it also impacts our homeowners that are doing a renovation loan, or it also impacts our developers that are also, putting capital in and lending on that side. So we have cost of all of those components, and we're thinking about it all. But yes, you will see that we will be increasing the number of acquisitions over the next 12 months, 16 months, using the in-rem process.
And I think it's worth noting that the block by block strategy is critical. And it's, literally every house has a different story to tell, as you know. And so we have to use different, strategies. Hopefully the in-rem will take care of a lot of them, but then understanding, what the community wants. A lot of the communities have already done planning, many have not. So understanding that as well. But I'm just going to keep coming back to the money. We need the money. So I'm going to work hard to figure out how do we make that happen for you. I have several other questions, but you're grabbing the microphone to be able to change it to
because
somebody
we
else.
got Councilwoman Porter. She's been waiting patiently. We'll come back to you, Councilwoman.
That's all right. I've got other subjects.
No worries. So I just have, no worries. Marathon. I just have a few questions. Commissioner Kennedy, I know you've been copied as of late on some emails from particular communities of mine. So my questions, I have 4 of them. They're really going to be focused explicitly on enforcement strategies, given that we have known illegal operators that are working in some of the communities that you mentioned. So my first question, what are the consequences for illegal operators that perform known illegal work within our community? Are there enforcement strategies and maximum time periods that DCHD can enforce any punitive action?
And I just want to clarify too for the question that you're specifically talking about like building permit or unlicensed work or,
so I'm actually
or
talking
construction
about a few
without
things.
a permit.
I'm talking about a few things. That performing illegal work and performing illegal work, and you have a known stop work order. I'm also talking about any type of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like, so not necessarily like home renovation, but also like we can start with that one. The words are escaping me, but there should be some sort of enforcement strategies or enforcement arm from DCHD. And I'll just be, quite frank, I love the work that you all do, but as of late, I am not seeing that enforcement arm in any of my communities.
Okay. I'm going to actually ask Deputy Hessler to step in specifically on some of the items associated with the stop work order on work without a permit. And then I think that there also could be some components to this that might be on the code enforcement side, that could look at some of the things in terms of unlicensed properties or things that are picked up by Deputy Booker's shop around that piece of it.
So not necessarily Deputy Booker's shop. So I can definitely commend Deputy Deputy Booker has been very responsive with code enforcement. I've really been asking agencies, when we're talking about a workforce capacity and operations issue, what is the breaking point whereby we have to intervene like full force? If we keep sending out workers to these places every single day, Erica Yates and her team, they're going out every single day to the same properties. That is wasting tax dollars. That is wasting operations that could be rerouted to different programs that will expand what you all are doing on the larger schedule.
Mm-hmm. Understood.
Thank you.
Deputy Hessler, you want to talk about?
Yes.
Yep.
So in relation to work without a permit, majority of our responses are 311 generated. However, inspectors will discover stuff on their own while either conducting other permit inspections or within the area and seeing things or being directed by interagency partners, outside agency partners, and community, et cetera. The process, once work is determined to be being completed without a permit or outside the scope of a permit, is to issue the stop work order, which is posted on the door and then followed up with a violation notice. That gets an immediate $500 citation, which is returnable to the Environmental Control Board with a request to a hearing or payment of that fine. Failing to do that, the $500 fine ultimately would go into default and triple. Mm-hmm. They also get a surcharge on their permits, which is 50% of the permit fees or $1,000, which for most permits it ends up being $1,000. That gets added on for when they come in to apply for the permit. So they can't actually get any permits at that point until they get the permits necessary for the work that they've performed without or outside the scope of the existing permits.
Is that process followed every time?
I'm sorry.
Is that process that you just documented followed every time?
That process is followed every time, yes.
Okay. So if there is an operator, a known operator that has not followed that process, that we know has not followed that process, what is the procedure with letting you all know for maximum enforcement on said operator?
So we respond to all the 311s, and anytime we'd find them working without a permit or outside the scope of a permit, they'd get another citation and an additional surcharge. So that mounts up on the property. There can get to the point where we need to take court action. So we would file either an injunctive relief or temporary restraining order to enforce something. Depending on the situation, we could take administrative action if it is rising to the level where there's an imminent threat to the public, particularly with row houses and neighboring properties. Most work doesn't rise to that level, but there is the occasion where we find something and we just need to go in and fix it, at which point we do bill the property owner and lien the property. All of the citations are liens on the property, as well as any work we would do are liens on the property, and that could drive a property into tax sale if unpaid, or it could be a separate collections issue with the Department of Finance and the Law Department.
No, I thank you for that, sir. Who's chairing the committee?
Council, you're done?
No, I'm not done, ma'am. Who's chairing the committee?
Me, I am.
Oh, okay. Ma'am, I'd like to make a formal request.
Yes.
With regard to the 1100 block of Nanticoke Street. I would like all stop work order requests put in, all 311 related to 1100 block of Nanticoke Street, and any action that you all are taking for 1100 block of Nanticoke Street. I think there is a predatory operator that is working on that street that has renovated multiple houses. We have documented video where he is flagrantly just going against work orders that you all have put in place as far as compliance, as far as enforcement. And so it is an imminent, urgent issue that the community has brought up, and it's like launched into a safety issue now. Yes, ma'am.
Well noted, correct? Okay.
Thank you. And my second question has to do with just the capabilities of your agency, and this is particularly directed to CAO Shorter. Have there been any discussions related to how can I put this, reorganizing the agency that Commissioner Kennedy operates? One of the reasons that I bring that up is that we have such a, her and her team are doing such a lofty yeoman's job with 30,000 permits. It's just such a considerable amount of workload, given that they have limited staff, given that they can't find the necessary personnel to support their current level of operations. And I'm very concerned that, at the inspector level, at the compliance level, at the council, the council level, you all are just not meeting the mark of the city. And I wonder if there's an opportunity where we can begin to think through reorganization of this agency, specifically taking out social services programs and rededicating them to social services agencies. And so this particular agency can specifically focus on affordable housing, access to affordable housing, compliance, things of that nature.
Well, I appreciate that question very much, Councilwoman. What I'll say is I think what will be helpful in appropriately defining performance measures and agency performance plans in this upcoming fiscal year, it'll put agencies across the board in a much better position and put the administration in a much better position to be able to make those decisions about staffing, because it seems from a workload perspective that we need to have a conversation about staffing level and making sure that we are properly supporting the agency. Separate from that, an agency performance plan with clear performance measures puts us in a much better position to say, this is core for this agency and this is not, and that it is much better positioned somewhere else. I don't think it would be fair to have that conversation today. No. Given the sort of lack of clear performance, a clear performance framework, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I hear you in terms of the need to make sure that we are properly staffing the agencies so that they could do the job that they are scoped to do.
And is that something that will be hopefully completed, the agency performance plan, by next budget year? That
is the plan. So okay. We plan in FY2023 to start that performance planning development process, and our hope is to have next year, when we are looking at the budget, and seeking your support and approval for that budget to have agency performance plans by agency to accompany the budget.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to just build on what CAO Shorter said by also highlighting that, this is something that I have been thinking about and that we have been thinking about, because one of the things that I noted earlier in the hearing, Service 740, which is the Dawson Center, we worked with Rec and Parks and Director Senemy, et cetera, to move that service to Recreation and Parks, which better aligns that service with the mission of the agency. So it is something that is in process with, there are a couple of outliers of services, that being one of them. Our next on the list is looking at before and after care would be the next.
So those are the ones. Those are the ones that I'm thinking about that can be rededicated to other agencies.
Yeah, and in terms of staffing and so forth, those at this point in time, the ones, the burden on the agency is not great, and that it's deterring us from the core missions of our job. I would state that at this exact moment, but it is something on the radar screen, and that is one reason why we've made that switch, working with the partners and the agency and the mayor's office to move Dawson.
So may I ask just a frank question, ma'am, and with all due respect, why are we not keeping up, just from an agency perspective, why are we not keeping up with some of the targets that we have set with regard to code enforcement, with regards to like compliance, checking on, permit? Like we're not necessarily meeting those marks. I mean, some of my colleagues have mentioned considerable contact with you all, and like it's just not making the mark. Like we're consistently, I feel like sometimes we're consistently just behind with a few agencies, with housing being one of them.
I would say that I'd be happy to talk a little bit more with you in detail on that, because I think that, we have just missed the mark slightly on some of our performance measures. We adjusted the targets for permit processing. We adjusted that target down because we knew that there was an impact from the general market in terms of cost of building construction and other things that were impacting permits. So we're on track for kind of meeting how many permits we process. We process over 37,000 permits a year. Like, I would say that while I don't feel that we're necessarily missing the mark on a performance measure with that, given that there are also outside forces that impact what permits are being pulled. So there's a little bit of give and take on that. Like I also stated, we strive to do the best we can, and in some instances it's not perfect. We're evaluating some of the IT components to it and other outside factors, specifically on permits. In terms of inspections, we have some numbers of inspections that have been down, but we're actually on target this year to exceed our inspections on the code enforcement standpoint. So,
So when I'm talking about missing the mark, and this kind of goes back to my larger perspective of like not just bean counting. So I'm fully aware of the performance measures, but most of them are quantity based. We need to be focused on more quality based performance measures, and so that's what I'm getting at. Like and that's what I'm saying, missing the mark. Like I see these inspectors. I see we email Erica Yates almost twice, 3 times a week. And that sometimes a day, but that's what that's what I'm talking about. Like not really focused on quantity but quality. And so like as you all kind of do that agency performance plan, like I encourage you like really think through quality metrics that are impacting the lives of our citizens. We have to, because you just mentioned like, oh, we're hitting the target. Like in my book, we're not hitting the target. If we're still like a quantity-based metric, like we're not hitting the target, where we still are going 4 and 5 times to said property in the month. Like that's not a mark that we're hitting, and that's good.
So
CA Shorter would like to respond.
But not, you go ahead.
No, and I would say thank you for that. I think that the last statement you made helped provide some clarification for me on what we're going after. And I think there are some things that do limit us, but I'd like to continue this conversation. We strive to do the absolute best that we can do for the citizens of Baltimore. And we also do that within some of the constraints that we have by law and what actions we can take and what actions we can't take. So, I would say that we do need to look at some of the things, like what are some of the triggers, and this is conversations we've had, internally, like for some of those repeat visits. Is it on a vacant property? Is it not on a vacant property? Is it an occupied property? Like how are and what are the available tools in the toolbox we have? And at what point does the next tool in the toolbox get triggered? And that would tie into some of the quality components.
And I appreciate, go ahead, Sia.
I was just going to add, and again, appreciate the feedback. There's a big difference between output and outcome. And you are absolutely right to say, while our teams are putting out fires, they are, as best as they can, dealing with the back and forth and dealing with the emergencies and dealing with the hot button and front burner, that we have to create an environment where we are properly staffing, properly scoping, and then saying to agencies, this is how we're going to judge success. And so you are absolutely right to point that out. What I will say is that we are creating a much more robust environment where, while the performance measures that are included in the budget is a good first step, a much more robust agency performance planning process where the agency says these are the things that we believe we should be doing as part of our mission, and this is how we're going to, our work plan to get these things done. And it becomes much more easy for you, your colleagues, the public, residents, business owners, visitors to say, nope, you're missing the mark on this, this, and this. Because if we use the 10 emails or the loudest, residents to measure an agency this size's success, then we'll never be able to say to them, job well done, because we just aren't, we're not properly setting out an opportunity for them to succeed. And so all that to say, I absolutely understand what you mean. I think we're going to make some really good progress in this upcoming budget year in terms of doing just that, creating a framework where we can say this is success, this is not.
Yeah.
And look forward to this discussion, kind of as we come back around next year.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I'll drop it. I know we're, we're in my last question has to do with what do you?
You're supposed to have two.
Oh yes,
But
ma'am. I'm sorry. Go
finish
ahead.
up.
No,
You've over your limit.
go ahead, ma'am. No, I'll wait.
Finish up.
I'll wait, ma'am. It's okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just to add, this is why training, best practices, apprenticeships, all those things play a role in quality and numbers. Moving on to Councilman Torrance and then Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. How are you, Commissioner Kennedy and team? I just want to first say, you respond.
Closer to your mic.
You hear me? I just want to say first, respond to the buy-in to be more. I'm thankful that you did update the website. It is no longer incorrect versus land versus structure. It was abandoning my existence for 2 months. I just want to say that you did correct it. My question to you in terms of this website is, how do we make it better? Because from the conversations with you guys about, from my conversations with you guys about the website, it was sold like Zillow, but it looks like Realtor.com, and I just want to make sure that we can make significant actual investments in it, because it is not useful to the persons that are on the ground in my impact zones, as well as persons who are interested in buying city property. It is hard for them to navigate, even with the actual videos. So I'm wondering, is there a 2.0 and upgrades that you're willing to make and make a cost to it? Because I tried to navigate it myself to see if I can get through the process to buy a property, and I'm computer savvy, and it frustrated me after an hour and a half.
I appreciate that feedback. That is something that we have not heard yet. But yes, we are willing to, look at what we can do to better the process. We actually conducted several focus groups working with developers, people, homeowners looking to buy property. They tested the website before we launched it. They went through, they provided feedback and tweaks that we needed, and had several meetings with the focus group, and made some of the changes that they suggested, and we're continuously open to changing it to make it better. So we'd be happy to set a time, outside of the hearing to go through kind of some of your key concerns and what we can do.
Perfect. So I have a litany of questions, but some of them I'm also standing in for Councilman Burnett as well, since he's out. I'm going to ask you one of his questions, and on my second
Councilman,
round.
you got your questions?
I know. I'm going to ask him for him.
No, but Councilman Dorsey is next. Let's get him. He's been waiting patiently.
No, I haven't even got a chance to ask a question
you
yet.
haven't had yours?
No.
Okay, well, you asked him about somebody else. You ain't did yours yet.
I know. I'm just lending my time to the man.
After you is Councilman Dorsey.
Perfect. So the first question is related to the LIGHT program. One, how many families apply for assistance through the LIGHT program? And then can you clarify the metrics of offers of applications processed and of the families who have been approved by the assistance?
Closer to the mic, Councilman.
So I just want to make one clarification, which is that the LIGHT isn't a program itself. LIGHT is an intake and assessment unit that manages kind of a single point of entry for pre-application for a number of our different programs, whether or not that be lead hazard reduction, Office of Rehabilitation Services, or weatherization assistance program. So I just want to make that one clarification, so that intake and assessment unit, they also, through the Office of Rehabilitation Services, also we have the housing upgrades to benefit seniors program. So people that apply through LIGHT are also kind of working through that program. We receive a number of applications per year for, through LIGHT. We have in the past had, some, waiting list for that program, because the majority of the applications, the residents need the Office of Rehabilitation Services. We do try to, work with them if they qualify for weatherization or if they qualify for lead hazard reduction, but the majority need the housing upgrades to benefit seniors or the Office of Rehabilitation Services. I will ask Deputy Hart to actually talk a little bit about the number of applications that we've recently received on average. We're typically kind of in the several hundred range.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your question. So for FY21, I have those numbers. Our goal was 500. We exceeded that by addressing 547 applications. We will exceed our FY22 mark. And I will say that we are getting support through our collaboration with code enforcement. We did get our enhancement improved to increase our number of social service coordinators, and then the other admin staff that we have that addresses the processing of that application. So there are several steps. And when we get those applications in, like Commissioner Kennedy said, one, they start at a pre-application phase, which we don't collect any documents. When we get to them, that is the hardest part of the process, is the document collection. Because when we assess that application, we have to assess the family and what's going on under the roof. So what is unique about LIGHT is that we don't turn anybody away. We don't deny an application. So a constituent may stay with us for several years, because what we find is we don't have a set starting point with that application. It may need to go to addressing the deed. So if there's a deed issue, and we know that up front, because that's one of the things we check up front, we have to start that application with working with our nonprofit legal partners to work through the deed issues to make sure that we can then in turn get through the rehab application process. So we know what the end game looks like, and so we have to address all of those factors on the front end. So what affects our numbers, because we could very well do double or triple the number of applications and get through those numbers. But what takes us the longest is actually addressing each individual application, assessing where that family is, and then taking considerable time to make sure that we can address the needs of that house and getting them what we need. So I hope that answers your question.
That is perfect. I personally had to help a resident do the document portion of the actual light program, the light application. Sorry, I had to personally help a resident actually upload documents for the actual application. So my next question is, because I've had one woman in my district who's been in the wait list for a long time, where are we on the wait list for the individual programs as well?
So again, we look at the applications collectively. What we were able to do is one, we had prioritization levels, and one was our older adults. So what we did was we looked at the age, because we do have a general idea of the age of our applicants. So what we did was we were with our new software that we have acquired since COVID, we were able to identify the age group. So we started with our older adults, and what we did was we cross-referenced our list with our HUBs partners. And so what we did was we split that list up to see who could get addressed through HUBs, who needed to be addressed in-house. When the Affordable Housing Trust money came, we were able to just be able to, with partnership of our HUBs partners, to be able to expedite some of those applications. So we used, as our commissioner says, use all our tools in the tool belt to be able to address the backlog. What we find now is that we are going down on our list. We always get requests that kind of trump, because they're emergencies. So our emergencies such as no heat, no hot water, life impacting things, they always trump the people who are waiting for, and I don't want to say low level, but things that can wait, because when it comes to the activities of daily living, emergency issues, we always want to be able to hop on those cases. So if it's something that's impacting children, water, heat, things of that nature, that always trumps the list. So there's always, if there's ever an emergency, something life-threatening, that's always going to impact the people that are waiting for maybe a small roof leak. So we do find some frustration with our constituency on those cases because they've been waiting, but that also identifies the severity of the need of how many emergency cases that we get.
And I would say as well, the staff is regularly also trying to, reaching out and touching base with the people on the applicants to kind of let them know where they are on the list, how it's moving up. And if anybody specifically has a name, address, we're more than happy to kind of walk through what we're looking at.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And we also are always able to help over the phone with older adults or constituents who can't help. And we still do home visits. So if there is a need to go pick up an application or walk a customer through it, we're always able to help with that as well.
I'll be emailing you before the hearing's over.
Sure.
Thank you. Before we hear from Councilman Dorsey, I have to emphasize this. This is a budget hearing. Any side things you have with this agency, I think that should be discussed on side conversation. Councilman Dorsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Were there funds rolled over because they were unspent under weatherization services? You got just over $7.5 million in weatherization, or in that section of the budget at least. Are there funds that rolled over because they were unspent?
There are, because those are federal grant funds, so there are time performances associated with that. That also covers appropriations, so that we have enough appropriations to cover the federal grant funding that we get. And also with COVID impacts, a number of the federal grants were extended in terms of use of funds and working. So yes, the basic answer is yes.
That there's some that are rolling over from previous years just because of difficulty in spending them because of COVID or whatever. Difficulty in spending because of COVID, and this is something that weatherization programs across the country have experienced. So there were extensions. The same happened on our lead hazard reduction grant as well, where we received an extension for funds associated with that that were COVID related for fiscal year 21 and 22. And was that not Did that not commonly happen prior to COVID?
No, it actually happened prior to COVID as well.
Pretty frequently, and so you're in the habit of, I don't want to characterize it that way, but asking for extensions is not uncommon.
It's not uncommon, but it's not something sometimes that we even ask for. Like, they also just give them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And how much of that fund was rolled over? I'm asking this on behalf of Councilman Burnett. I want to say it's.
I would need to get with you exactly in terms of how that works. What I would say is that
it sounds like it's multiple things.
Yeah, it's not impacting our ability to deliver the service and meet the need of the clients and who is applying.
Okay, good. Okay. I have a question that kind of relates to some of what's already been discussed here about, it's kind of a nuance of this question about capacity for enforcement. I don't want to beat a dead horse. But it's something that's come up with me. I've been talking about the need for zoning reform for some time, and that conversation specifically revolves around the idea of expanding housing opportunity in middle neighborhoods and neighborhoods that are made up significantly of detached and semi-detached homes where multifamily is currently prohibited. And when talking, and as just a baseline, let's be real clear. We have a housing shortage in this city. We need more housing units to be developed. That's not that's not up for debate, right? And people like voucher tenants are facing long times trying to find placement for their vouchers. One thing that comes up, though, when we talk about allowing conversions, there's a lot of kind of like proxy arguments that people make, why we shouldn't do a certain thing because it runs afoul of their ideas of neighborhoods and things like that. We'll just call them NIMBYism. The thing comes up where we shouldn't allow these new forms of housing or different forms. We shouldn't allow more housing because we can't do the housing code enforcement that we should be doing right now. This comes up, and I always have to say, well, we don't say that when somebody wants to build 100 new units in a fancy building somewhere outside of my district, or convert a warehouse in some other part of the city that's not in my district into a whole bunch of nice new apartments. We only say that when we want to fight against new housing next door to you, a house being converted into 2 apartments or 3 apartments in your single family neighborhood. Is there any merit to this idea that we shouldn't be allowing new housing because of our housing code enforcement and building inspections capacity? Not even just code enforcement, building inspections. We have the capacity to allow new housing to be built, right? This should not be a concern, right? Or do you need more money?
I'm going to state that not looking at the specifics of where the housing is being built, what type of housing is being built, any changes that might need to occur for that housing to be built. But on a general basis, we have the capacity within the agency to perform code enforcement on any, rental or property and maintenance code, interior inspections. We have the capacity to process permits for building permits, and we have the capacity to complete building inspections that are needed to build units within the city of Baltimore.
Thanks. I think that a lot of the folks that, on the one hand, we have folks saying, don't change the rules so that there can be apartments next door to me. Those folks, that's the other thing are that there are disinvested parts of the city that continue to feel like code enforcement is a thing that happens in somebody else's neighborhood. It doesn't happen in my neighborhood. And, I looked recently at every single ordinance that has occurred for multifamily conversion from single family to multifamily. There have been fewer than 80 in the last decade that have occurred legally. And there are people in certain neighborhoods who feel like there's a lot more than that. And that capacity for illegal housing to be created continues to perpetuate people's beliefs that their neighborhoods are already inundated with unscrupulous landlords, and it makes it challenging. I want to make sure that we're doing the absolute best. As Councilwoman Porter brought up, there are bad landlords that concentrate in certain neighborhoods throughout the city. I represent an anomaly of a district in how much detached single-family housing we have. I want to make sure that we're doing the absolute very best for districts like District 10 and District 9 and District 7 and District 12, District 13, where we have really, really distressed housing conditions, so that they feel like I'm not trying, the residents of those communities don't feel like I'm trying to pile on something new when I'm looking to create actually housing opportunity for people to move out of distressed neighborhoods and into areas of higher opportunity. I don't want them to think that housing code enforcement is the reason why we shouldn't be creating more housing opportunity in neighborhoods of high opportunity. That's all I wanted to say.
So, Councilman, just for clarification, we all have areas that are very distressed in this entire city, in every single district.
I am
some
exceptionally blessed to have very, very little. That's my point, is that I have exceptionally...
Please don't, you shouldn't call out districts, because that's labeling, but if, I just want to make that clarification. There are others that you did not mention, and that should not happen that way.
All districts matter, I guess. Thank you.
And even if you have little, I'm sure you have a piece, but you shouldn't label numbers. We're all in this together. Councilman Glover, do you have any questions at this time?
I do, Madam Chair. Thank you. My question, I really don't know exactly what agency this is. I don't know if it's housing or if it's DOT, code enforcement, but in my district, we're seeing a lot of the pop-up, like car wash, going on into the neighborhood. I know that many a times the water is coming from the home, electricity is coming from the home, so I would assume there would be a housing issue. A lot of times they're taking up the place of parking in the neighborhood. Maybe that's a DOT issue. I don't know, but can you kind of give me some information on who I should direct, these issues to?
Yeah, I would say absolutely submit through 311. So we have record, and then also Deputy Commissioner Booker and his team. You can always feel free to email us directly, but we'd like to submit everything through 311 as a note for an illegal car wash. But code enforcement would be out on the street to take action as necessary for those. And we do that on a regular basis.
I just want to clarify. So DOT has nothing to do with this?
So I'm saying we would do the code enforcement piece, okay. And then if there's anything that is needed from another agency, Deputy Booker and his team would pull that other agency in.
Okay. Booker, can you elaborate on some things?
Okay, there's a couple of things that happens with those pop-up car washes, if you will. First of all, they've been run out of a home, usually. Preston and Broadway right now is just evolving. I watch it every day now, trying to figure out how to approach it. But it's a DOT issue because they're in the street, right? They usually take up parking spaces in block alleys. But then the water is coming from the home, which is not zoned to be a car wash. So we have an interesting dynamic because usually they aren't washing the cars on the property. So technically, and I'll yield to Council Hessler, I always call him a counsel, but I'll yield to him. Because they're not washing them on the property, it is technically not zoning because it's not on the property. The water may be coming from the property, but the cars are actually in the street. So if they're not presenting an impediment to traffic flow. You know, it's kind of one of those gray areas where I think code may be a little silent on it, and I'll yield to my colleague, Jason Hessler, for more.
Yep, Councilman, this is the exact kind of thing that we use the multi-agency task force for. So we're meeting weekly with DOT, police department, liquor board, code enforcement, zoning, and we go over properties that are getting a high volume over the last 6 months of service requests, but then each agency also brings up individual issues that might be coming to light through the council or other means, so that we can get that partnership among the agencies. And so we review stuff ahead of time, and then we meet with the whole group, and we have assignments. We track it with the CEO Shorter's office and the mayor's office of not innovation, city stat. The names changed so many times I can't remember, but these require multi-agency response is the bottom line. So there may be a tie to zoning if we can link it to the property. Definitely DOT, possibly BPD, just on how they're operating.
Okay, so what about, so for instance, I'll give you an example. So far as the mobile car washes, okay? So I want to get my car washed, and the mobile car wash guy is telling me to go around the corner and park my vehicle, which I'm in front of somebody else's home. So what that homeowner gotta hear is the generators, the cars being washed, you know, the neighbors are saying, why are they doing it in front of my home? What do we do about those issues? Because these are issues that I'm starting to have now, that they're popping, they're mobile car washes, and they're telling them to park in front of other people's property, which are homeowners, and now they're calling my office upset because of the fact that it's not their car, somebody else's car, and creating a lot of noise in that block. So what do we do in reference to issues like that?
Yeah, those are even more difficult, I think, because a lot of what Chief Booker and I see are the car washes that are located just off of a property, and they're continually operating in that same location. So we can respond
to those
multiple times, catch them doing it at different times of the day, and address it with the agencies. The mobile car washes, as I understand what you're saying, is, you know, a guy pulls up in his van, he's got a power washer, he's got his own source of power and water, and he's detailing a car in front of somebody's home in the street. And those will be a lot harder to address because they won't be in that same location within a couple hours. They'll be off in, you know, someplace else in the city or world. Those won't be a zoning issue because they're not going to, generally won't be on the property, they'll be in the street. So we would need to work with both DOT and BPD on addressing those things.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to,
It's a big problem, I'm telling you. I mean, we have some lots that the community have, you know, took their time to really beautify those lots, and they're coming into the community and parking their trailers, their trucks on the lots, just so they wouldn't block up those small secondary streets for washing cars. And it's really a big issue that I know in my district, and I'm quite sure it's in other parts of the city, but we got to address like this issue like head on. It's really becoming an issue.
If we could, you know, share a couple of locations after this, and get some eyes on, and we'll figure out a solution.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
And then I have two questions, and then I'm finished with my questions. Back to when I was talking about inspectors and citizen requests, what about the multifamily inspections? What is the work order on those, or have they increased because, you know, people are having housing issues and now more people are moving in in other places with other people? Families are starting to become multifamilies in a household, you know, and you have that limit. How are you handling those inspections?
I just want to make sure that I clarify the question. Are you specifically asking about like a single-family residentially zoned property that has multiple people
Yes.
living in the property that could be of the same family or potentially a couple different families
Right.
in that property?
Renting rooms out and doing other things.
So I would say, we absolutely will, complete interior inspections. We get either 311 complaints or neighborhood or our inspectors, our code enforcement inspectors, while they're on the ground, also, kind of are able to observe sometimes to then be able to work with the property owner as well as those inside the property to gain access to do interior inspections and to see if there's any, code enforcement action that would be needed at that time. Deputy Booker, do you have anything else to add on that?
Sure, those are sometimes difficult to unpack because it's hard to define, who's a family, right? But it takes a little bit more, more of an in-depth look, a little bit more digging, talking to a property owner, seeing who should actually be in a house. We do have code that addresses overcrowding, but those are sensitive situations because sometimes you never know how you define the family. But that code does allow us to look in and unpack those.
Okay. And then my last question, I know a number of people fill out applications to apply to get new windows. Do they have to go through the lead program or the rehab program, and why? Which one?
So it depends. So new windows typically you can actually get windows through both programs. So it all depends on which program they're eligible for. So lead hazard reduction program would cover new windows if the presence of lead paint is present in that window frame, which you'd be surprised when the lead risk assessment is completed. Sometimes in a house, we've had it come up where there's lead paint in 3 windows, but not in the other windows. So under that program, we can only replace those 3 windows. Plus, you also have to be 80% or below AMI and have children in the home under the age of 6 or visiting children under the age of 6 to qualify to get windows through the lead hazard reduction program. Otherwise, you can apply to Office of Rehabilitation Services. Housing upgrades to benefit seniors also can address, windows through that program as well.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Ramos.
No.
Oh, who was next?
Real quick, no. Councilman Torrance had 2 questions. Am I right?
I had 2 for me.
Well, for Councilman Burnett. So let him get his 2 in. Go ahead.
So,
You going to get your 2 in? Look at the mic.
Sorry, Odette.
And then Councilwoman Odette, you next.
All right, thank you. So, I'm trying to be fair to my colleagues. So my next series of questions are related to impact zone investments. We are thankfully on this Friday going to have the groundbreaking for Bakersview 2. But what I'm finding in terms of the impact zones is that we're seeing a cluster of new investments that are starting to pop up around them. I'm wondering, is there a strategy to eventually move the footprint of those investment zones to support those new projects as well?
At this time, we are not looking at changing the footprint. We've done significant planning with the communities. Doesn't mean that we're not looking at, what's happening a block outside of the footprint and to see how best to support those projects or address those projects. But at this time, we're not looking at changing the footprint.
Okay, and my next question is,
Where's Burnett?
no, that is that was one of the comment.
Okay. I just want to make
It's
sure.
my next one.
Because Councilwoman Odette would have been next.
All right.
You doing Burnett's stuff?
He can do Burnett's questions.
Yes.
I know, but I want to make sure he's doing it.
I'm doing it. This is my last one before I run. My last question
okay,
is...
down there at
so,
that end.
This last question was about reorganizing your staff in terms of code enforcement, because between the hours of 8 and 4, a lot of things do not happen in not only Councilman Burnett's district, but all of our districts. How can we really look at a staffing model where we have agents who are available at night and on weekends? Because I can tell you, this morning I drove by, and even though someone filed a 311, there was a mattress in the middle of Druid Park Lake Drive that was put there on Saturday morning. So just understanding like the reality that the city does not operate just between 8 and 4, but how can we accommodate or shift staffing to accommodate what's the reality?
I would say that that's a good question, and that's something that we have not talked about internally, but would be, look at having those discussions. I think that there are some potential pros and cons both ways, and that we would have to evaluate what that would look at and what both, the impact and the outcomes and so forth would be of making a staffing switch like that.
Can I set that as a budget request to have that meeting?
Budget request, go ahead.
I would like to have a meeting within the next month or 2 months to discuss the staffing, to actually give you guys some time to think about it, because this is something that I remember from when I was in the mayor's office that we were trying to switch to, because we noticed that a lot of issues with illegal dumping and zoning issues were occurring at night, especially when persons are performing work without permits. So I want to actually really think about moving that way.
We can have the discussion. I would say that, I don't think that having inspectors out at night would actually end up having an increased catching of illegal dumping. I mean, we have had some of those conversations, but open to having the conversation and, like I said, talking through the potential pros and cons of
I'm talking about more than
on
illegal dumping. I'm talking about work that's being performed outside of the 8 to 4. I have a number of single families, row homes, where people are performing work at 9 and 10 o'clock at night, and the officers will pull up and say, that's a code enforcement issue. There's nothing I can do about it. Okay. So I just want to make sure that we are being able to respond to residents in real time, and I'm not getting frustrated because Ms. Johnson keeps emailing us because the work is being performed. We can't find proof because they have tape and things over the windows. So I just want to make sure that we're able to respond in real time to our residents' calls.
Okay, understood.
Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My colleagues talked a lot about work being done without permits. This has been an uptick. What do you think that's attributed to? My theory, I'll just tell you my theory, is because there are some people who just don't like to follow the rules. Got it, right? There are some people who actually have tried to follow the rules, and it's hard to follow the rules. So I'm kind of wondering what, I know you had spoken about the permit office earlier and the reforms you're making, but I'm kind of hoping that those reforms will help us with this problem in terms of, folks not getting proper permits. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I think, one of the key things that we mentioned earlier when talking about changes within the permit is that the key focus of the changes that we're making is on the user end of the system, right? And so that is a key focus is on the UI and the user interface design, and that being easier for the end user to utilize. And I think that we, potentially will capture some people out there that would like to follow the rules, or they've tried, or they've given up, and because it'll be an easier system to do that. I think there's also an education component that is needed across the city as it relates, and we'll be tying this in with the permit changes. Even in terms of I've had the experience where a contractor, states to a homeowner that the homeowner might ask a question like, well, can you get a permit, or is a permit needed for this? And the contractor says, well, if you want the permit, that's going to be an extra $800 charge, or $1,000 charge, or $1,200 charge. And the homeowner doesn't know necessarily that, they're just seeing $800 or $1,200, right? So we also have an education piece to this, not just on the contractor side, but for residents and homeowners across the board, which is a focus of ours as well. So I think between education, outreach, ease of permitting in terms of user interface, that we will, start to hopefully see more people not performing work without a permit. I would say a significant number of people that are doing significant work on properties without permits. And this isn't just somebody that's doing a window job or, a one mini split air conditioning unit job. I'm talking about, rehabbed houses in certain areas of the city. For those, I do feel that is more just a blatant disregard for the system and, whatever it may be. And those are the ones that we have to continue to, go after and hit as best as we can with the stop work orders, et cetera.
Yeah, it's just been out of control, actually. So hopefully we can come to a solution. My second question is unrelated. There was a letter that was sent to you. I do not have it, but I heard about it, where several of the nonprofits who get CDBG and also Catalyst had been claiming that we are still delaying in getting their reimbursements to them up to 700 days. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what reforms you're going to make to the office to make sure that, and I get CDBG, totally get it, federal money, it's slow, but what you just talked about with year 48 is because of the new allocations. There are several folks that still don't have reimbursement and allocations or even a contract for year 47 or for year 46. So can you talk a little bit more about what those reforms are going to look like? That'd be helpful. Also for the Catalyst as well. That's our money. So our meaning the city's money. So if you can talk a little bit more about that, that would be great.
So I'll address the Catalyst grants first. We actually reformed pieces of that office. We've actually also hired a new kind of director of grants management that is on board and starting. That process, we also kind of separated out capital and operating because there was a significant amount of work on, a smaller number of staff. So by staggering, that allows us to better be able to process those grants faster. Staff is also utilizing the Neighborly computer system, which will help us be able to, in terms of applications, tracking of applications, production of the contract, the grant agreement itself, tracking disbursements, et cetera. So we've been doing a significant amount of work there on the CCG side. In terms of community development block grant side, for the CD 46 year, that was the year that was significantly delayed because of COVID, because of the CV money, et cetera. There are 4 outstanding contracts from CD 46, and those are in a varying process of finalizing some things with the applicant, moving through, and those should be moving forward to the Board of Estimates fairly soon. So there's only 4 outstanding from 46. We had stated and had numerous conversations with kind of the nonprofit world that as soon as we got through, those 46s, which we got through the majority of those 46s, actually by the end of the calendar year of 21, that we'd be moving directly into 47, and for them to have their the same paperwork, everything that's needed, and we'd be moving directly into that. Out of the 74 47s, we have 20 that are in the, kind of final stages of getting the final documents through and getting those forward. I will say that in terms of payments, some of the 47s, we're going to be working with the comptroller's office on the process of getting once the contract has been approved by the Board of Estimates, getting the stamped approved version back from the comptroller's office. So we'll be working, to kind of streamline that and see if there's a way. That is one of the pieces that if we have an agreement that was approved at the beginning of May, and we haven't received it back, from the comptroller's office, that delays us being able to process the invoice if they've already submitted their draw request or invoice for us. I will say that there are times, and we saw this with the 46s, where we pushed the contracts through, and then we sent the requests, and some of the nonprofits still haven't submitted us their draw requests to get their funding. So I think that it's a varying different pieces of it. Like I said, I don't feel that this is necessarily staffing. I'm not saying this for anything about Deputy Steve Janes, so I want to preface that. But we do have a retirement happening in that division. That division is also, they started the process on using Neighborly as the first application portal, and the next process will be pulling in to use that for the other stages, which allow for tracking and moving forward. We've also made changes on some of the smaller CDBG awards to actually couple them so that we could do 2-year contracts instead of 1-year contracts for them. And we're also looking at, and I've asked to also see kind of the checklist that is required by HUD for the contract, the checklist that we, send to the agents, to the nonprofit organizations to make sure that everything is aligned. One thing I will say is that the city of Baltimore is well known within HUD and the HUD program office locally as well as nationally for having an exceptional program and very little issues when it comes to audit and audit time and any type of recapture of funds or things like that. The staff is attunely attention to detail and likes to maintain, that level of excellence and service from that. That does not mean that there aren't places where we have been making changes in terms of even expediting on the 47s. Last year, we worked with the mayor's office of the EMBU office, the mayor's office of women business owned, to look at the waivers on the operating grants, the waivers on the capital, the waivers on the operating grants that were below a certain threshold, waivers for the ones that are only staff related that don't have other costs. So we've made steps and strides in the last 12 months to really be expediting those contracts.
So that was a lot. So if there's, so one of the biggest complaints that I had heard outside of this letter was just that there was the award to the contract was like a year and a half. And it sounds like you're trying to catch up on that. So the issue was getting the contract approved by the comptroller's office, or do you just have one lawyer that's looking at all of the contracts? I mean, what's the backlog there?
The backlog isn't necessarily in the contract piece itself. So we have the contract officer within the agency that works, with the nonprofit organization to ensure, like I said, all the necessary documents are so forth. We already utilize a template, so this isn't like, it doesn't stray from one thing to another. It's fairly straightforward with most of the information within the template. And I think the biggest piece that we explained, and if we were not delayed on the 48s, we would have been aligned based on where we are with the 47s. We would have been starting the 48s in June. Typically, there will always be a delay in CDBG, just the way that the program works. It typically will not 100% line up where the contract is going to the Board of Estimates before the start of the fiscal year, that there will always be like, this goes back 30 days or 45 days by the time we get it.
There's also different fiscal years, so
there's also different
program years.
And program years and all of the other components to that.
Right.
So the biggest piece that we had was that delay in 46. That was caught up, and then the staff worked out and aligned with me so that by July and August, we would have been working on the 48s. Now that is going to be delayed, but that is due to where we are, because we still have to put the annual action plan out for comment, public comment, review, and then submittal to HUD for approval.
Yeah, no, I understand that it's complicated. I do think that for some of the nonprofits that don't have a lot of capacity, cash flow was always a big deal. So as long as I know that you're working on it, and I appreciate that, then, we can, send the word out.
And I've had conversations with Deputy Mayor Carter and Paul Taylor and the, Mayor's office of small and women-owned business as well, just to also look at what is possible for some of the smaller nonprofits to assist with either lines of credit or different things that could help as we're trying to work through some of these, especially with the issues that are outside of our control. For the issues that are within our control, we are actively looking at how to streamline and expedite those.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Next subject is back to the rental licensing. I don't recall, maybe I missed it, but I don't recall that any of my colleagues asked about the current, obviously they asked about the inspections, et cetera, but is the licensing information on CodeMap correct now? My understanding was that it came down because there was the technology change. And I just, because what I do is if I get a problem property, I do a couple things. Look up the registration to see if it's properly registered. Look up the taxes, make sure that they paid the taxes. I have the tax sale list, so I figure out where, I try to get all of the information before I come to you about what might be a solution, right? So of course, unfortunately, I have to go to 4 different places, but that's a different issue. So I want to make sure that the information that's there, particularly on this rental licensing thing, because it all came down at some point, is back online.
It is very, very close to having the rental licensing and short-term licensing, et cetera, being back online. We're finalizing and are on target for the date that we laid out. Right now, some of the dates, when you look in CodeMap, some of the dates might be off of the licensing year and the licensing date. But that, over the next kind of 30 days to 60 days, will be tightened up.
Right, because I had seen a July 7th date that was going to be back online, but I just didn't know if you had already put up some information or not. So, no. Yeah. Okay. No, that's super helpful. Again, to just make sure we have all the right information, as we move forward. I think Burnett has a couple other questions.
No, Burnett don't have any questions. Because we're going to wrap this up. Can you have one more question, Councilwoman? Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead.
I have some.
I'm going to get you ready.
Oh, go ahead, Glover, go ahead.
All right,
go ahead, Councilman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just some stuff I had typed up early prior to coming down here. So I know that CHDC is responsible for inspecting our homes and making sure that code enforcers go out and cite properties and things of that nature. Is it also the agency's responsibility to, when they're citing like those properties, to look at the surrounding of the areas, to cite to see if there's something that they see that's wrong, illegal, to report as well?
Absolutely. Our code enforcement inspectors are out every day on their regular routes that they do throughout the neighborhoods. And, they are trained and they are told that if they are out at a specific address for a specific item, that if they see something next door or when they're driving away or down the street, that they stop to address that as well. So they absolutely do that on a regular basis.
I have another question. So have you guys had asked for like any ARPA funds to help somehow vulnerable residents? And the reason why I asked because I got an email sent to me, Ms. Johnson, that had a $500 citation, and it just so happened that her lawn guy just didn't come past because of the fact she was in the hospital. So she was issued a citation. Now she feels like, her house is going to be taken away. This is what she's feeling. It's going to be taken away from her. And it's going to go up for tax sales and things of that nature. And I know I think HUD has like a program where they're helping some vulnerability adults, but also those that are like 50 and 60. So a lot of these individuals are vulnerable as well. So do we have anything in place where you guys have, try to solicit any funds through ARPA to help those homeowners, residents out?
So we do have, and the mayor did award under his announcement for the housing ARPA announcement, there's programs for housing upgrades to benefit seniors, healthy homes funding, et cetera, which do help our vulnerable residents and our older adults. I would say that also our code enforcers, enforcement agents are also trained, to try to work with homeowners in those situations to find a solution and so forth. It makes sense if the person was in the hospital, and that might not have been able to be the case. But we do have programs available to also ensure that that homeowner would not, to ensure that as best as our ability, given what it is, to help that homeowner so that they do not lose the property at tax sale. So I would, also recommend, if you have a specific constituent in mind, to share the information so that we can look at what it is. And I think that it is something, out there, and it is sometimes difficult on the ground when you're, doing the job to, they do make attempts to contact the homeowner, to door knock, but if somebody is in the hospital, that is a difficult situation because we just can't contact them.
Okay, so if that individual was able to provide like proof that, okay, gotcha. All right, thank you.
Councilwoman Odette, I'm just want to, you got 3, 4, 5, how many more questions you got? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking at, again, in the book, Service for 745, Housing Code Enforcement. Under effectiveness, percentage of service requests close on time, which is 50 days. What does closed mean? And the reason I ask that is because we have this issue where the 311 comes back to the resident and says it's closed, but it's not done, right? The work is not done. The legal dumping hasn't been picked up. So what is it that you're measuring here? You're saying 15 days where the service is closed, or that the work was done?
That the service request is in fact closed. The way that the system was designed was that the call comes in, it drops into the inspector's bucket if it's property related. The fundamentals of what the inspectors do is observe and document. They don't actually clean, cut, or board. So when we say closed, and that's why we're particularly proud of the fact that we close 99% of them on time and within 3 days usually, although we have a 15-day duration, because we know we're closing it to get it in somebody else's bucket to act on it. So closed, to answer your question, Councilwoman, just means that we went out, put eyes on it, determined what bucket should be in it or what action should be taken, and then handed it off to the appropriate agency for cleaning, boarding, and cutting.
So I will say that when we had Director Allen here from 311, we have had this issue since I've been here, and I haven't been here very long, so I know my colleagues have been here for a while longer, where, again, the resident gets the 311 back saying closed. It actually means transferred. Can your officers use the word transferred and not closed? We need to change this because we've been asking for a change. Director Allen has said, well, we're training everybody to do it right, and there's all kinds of things in Salesforce, and we're saying, no, we want what the resident gets back, we want it to say transferred or something like that. Because what happens is a resident gets closed back, but it's still not boarded, and the illegal dumping is still there. So closed to the resident means done, but closed to the agencies means transferred. So we have to address, am I right, Mr. Chair? We have to address this because we want the resident to see transferred or in process or whatever, and then that is going to have to change your indicator there.
Can I say something real quick? And I understand exactly what you mean, but I think that comes to 311 because when they call 311, 311 don't explain that the 15 days is for the investigation. All they say is we're going to come out. So the constituent think, oh, they're going to remove the trash, they're going to cut the grass.
No, and I totally get that. I
So
totally
a lot of
agree
it comes from 311, but you talking about when they get it back on their phone.
Transferred.
Exactly.
comes back, it says close.
So that is
And I'd also, Deputy Hessler, do you want to?
Sure. We've been working with BCIT on this issue. Our number one service request is for sanitation. It represents probably
Oh, sure.
30,000.
Yeah, we call you all the time. I know.
It represents about, I
You're
would
on
say,
all those emails.
30,000 of the 50,000 plus SRs that we receive. That SR has been updated for quite some time now, so that when a code enforcement inspector completes their inspection and they go in, and then the information is transferred over to 311 and then shared with the customer, it no longer says that the property was closed in the messaging. It says that the property was inspected, and it provides some additional information in relation to that, depending on what the inspector has selected on the action taken. So an inspector might issue a violation notice, they may issue a citation, they could create a work order because there's an existing notice, they could do all three. And so depending on what they select, a specific message is provided to the customer if they've submitted an email along with their SR. So we have made that upgrade to that one type of SR, and we are in the process of doing it for the other 17 types. And that initiative actually sparked, and I believe Director Allen spoke about this, taking a look at citywide service requests and doing the same activity. So other agencies, I know DOT and DPW are both working on that as well. For illegal dumping specifically, because those SRs are handled separately, we are transferring those requests for cleanups directly to DPW after the investigation. So we go in to the 311 system on those, enter the investigation's been completed, what action has been taken, and the SR does stay open and gets transferred to DPW when it's in the streets, alleys, or city property.
So then, and I'm very happy to hear that that process is moving forward, where you're actually transferring and you're working SR through SR to get that done. So I would just suggest that in your indicator you change that word, because right now the indicator says % of service requests closed on time. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the inspector went out, figured out what was going on, and then you know what I mean? So just FYI. My next question is also on page 264 on the promote home ownership budget. So efficiency, number of days on average from complete application date to decision date. I wonder if we wanted to actually say like payment date. I mean, because the outcome, and I know you're going to go through a new set of indicators at some point, but I know that we as the council want to make sure that folks are getting their pay or whatever work is being done, right? So, or the payment for the grant or whatever, and not necessarily that there was a decision. Unless, I mean, yes, we want to see that there's a decision, but then usually after a decision, there's 10-day wait to get the check.
No, there's not, because we changed the processing. We changed the process for ordering checks about 4 years ago now. So there is no longer a wait to get the checks after the decision date. We order the checks like earlier in the process once the staff has enough of the information. So it is no longer a wait after that decision date.
Meaning the decision is made, you push a button, and the money spits out.
Meaning that we have already started the process of ordering the check before the decision is made, so that the check would be here at the time it's needed for settlement. So a lot of times when the decision is made, we already have the check in hand in the office.
So you don't think that we need to change that indicator to show, I mean, you're going to be working through I guess it sounds like you're going to be working through a process to kind of look at all of these, but so no, I appreciate that, because when I thought about that, I said, well, don't we want actual check date, because, or at least the check in hand, because that's really what our residents and our new residents really want.
Yeah, and that's what we changed that process a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is a text that just came from me. Somebody's watching us on television, and the text came over to X. You guys, the concern is about the receivership law, where they can take your home right from under you due to an auction. This mostly affects, black and brown people, and she just feel like, they're stealing their generational wealth. What can we do to find like a different approach?
So I would state that we do not take anyone's home. Receivership is only utilized for vacant properties. And that is a court process. So a receivership case is filed. The owners of the property are notified of that case. The owner of the property can choose to renovate the property and obtain a use and occupancy permit to vacate the vacant building notice. If they are not able to do so, they could, very rarely does this happen, but they could sell the property to someone who then enters into the agreement with the court to renovate the property. If those are not options and determined, then the judge would order the property to a receiver, and then it would go to auction. But I want to be very clear that in receivership, we are not taking anyone's home that they live in. It is only due for vacant properties, nuisance vacant properties that have been determined to be a nuisance, and the property owner has multiple different times during the court process to step up to state that they are able to vacate that vacant building notice.
Okay.
And I would just add, Councilman, that at auction, the property sold at...
Thank you. So I'm texting as we go back and forth. Yeah.
Oh, and yeah, this is a good point. I know what Jason's going to say.
The property sold at auction, it's sold to the highest bidder. So while the receiver does recover costs for advertising and running the auction, the city then is paid out any debts that are owed, any lien holders are paid, and if there's a balance of any money, if there's a profit made on the sale of that property, it goes back to the property owner. So it is very similar to if they tried to sell the property themselves and paid a real estate commission and then everything that was owed on the property. And that does happen.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman, you good?
Yeah, fine, thanks.
Do we have questions for Live Baltimore?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Can we excuse the rest of DHCD with the exception of the commissioner? Okay, excellent. Commissioner Kennedy, want to thank you and your team. Give me 1 second, please. Oh, let me call you back, Madam Vice President. I'll call you right back. Sorry about that. That was the Council Vice President. Commissioner Kennedy, want to thank you and your team. Want to thank Steph Murdoch, who's incredibly responsive to me and my office on a daily basis. I already gave Kimberly Rubens her shout out earlier last week, but she is that special that she deserves 2 days of shout outs because she's an absolute rock star. Want to thank Peggy White for all her assistance with e-permits every time we have an issue. I know Deputy Commissioner Hessler, as he's also known in other circles, Deputy Commissioner Hammer. I was going to let that slide from last year. Has done an excellent job of helping constituents and businesses and developers navigate that system. Eric Uttenreither on a number of different demolition issues. I don't have enough fingers to count the number of times in the last fiscal year that he has showed up on site in person to do an inspection at my request. Angelisa Banks, in terms of the property registration, has been incredibly responsive. I really appreciate it. Of course, our zoning director, Mr. Veal, Gancham and Frank, every time we have a plans issue, appreciate it. Bill Berge and Tony Badon, I've already referenced their work on the 800 blocks of Harlem and Edmondson. A special thank you to David McGinnis, who's running SIU now. I know that he had very, very big shoes to fill and he has demonstrated his capacity to fill those shoes, and there's a lot to be said for that. And lastly, two people I want to especially highlight. One is Seth Greer, who is one of the brightest minds in city government, and has been an incredible partner on a variety of issues that we deal with on the council. And lastly is Miss Erica Yates on the code enforcement side of things, who is, yes ma'am, who does the type of work that impacts quality of life for our residents. What you've heard this council, well, you haven't heard it, but what folks from this administration and folks who are watching from home have heard this council dig in about all week. A lot of it surrounds basic quality of life issues. And it's people like Erica Yates that help move the needle on that in a consistent manner, that somehow find a way to help give us faith in the city of Baltimore and in city government. So please know your efforts are deeply appreciated. So with that, you all got a busy day ahead of you. Please go do what you were doing before you were at this hearing, with the exception of I'm asked the commissioner and Steph to stay for Live Baltimore's presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to Vice Chairman Stokes and Deputy Commissioner Hessler. I'll see you outside on the follow-up on that item. Thank you.
Come on up, Annie.
Live Baltimore, you can come up and take your seats.
It's a lovely box. I love it. Thank you. We'll make sure this gets out to the rest of the committee.
I just have one slide.
Wait till it gets back. Everybody's preparing for this evening's craziness, so you'll have to excuse us. Yeah. No, this is a crazy setup the way that it is, but it's a 200-year-old chamber, so here's what we got. Mm-hmm. Did you see Chair Stokes out there? Is Stokes out there?
I didn't see about that. He wasn't there when I walked by, so waiting for somebody to start.
I could just start it. I could really, but I'd like to give her an audience. Oh, we have to wait 1 minute anyway because of Charm TV. Just a minute.
Oh, yeah. 4:30.
Yeah.
I was certain that you were going to finish early, Commissioner. We came a little early. Thought you
No.
were finished.
Yeah, we're all here. Everybody's here.
A drive or?
I have just that one slide.
Yeah, housing fund. You want to take over?
We'll just wait for the commissioner. No, Eric, the chair asked them to come in at 4:30. He just didn't put it on his schedule.
Yeah, probably.
Just have one. She's ready. She's ready.
Okay, we are now, it's 4:30, and we're gonna have Live Baltimore give their presentation. And can you introduce yourself and your staff that's with you?
Yes, absolutely. Good afternoon, distinguished members of the council. It's a pleasure to be here with you on behalf of Live Baltimore. I am Annie Milley, Live Baltimore's executive director, and with me I have Julie French, Live Baltimore's director of operations and chief fiscal officer.
Okay, how long your slide presentation is?
Very short.
Okay, thank you. You can proceed.
Okay. So as you all know, Live Baltimore's name and mission are synonymous. We want more people to live in Baltimore City. We pursue this mission through a variety of programs that are aimed at attracting residents, retaining residents, and supporting healthy housing markets. We like to remind folks every single chance that we get that city residents are the city's greatest assets, and we can quantify this through the economic impact that residents have on our city. In FY21, over $1 billion of our city's income came from residents' taxes. That's the majority of our general fund revenue. Resident spending annually amounts to more than $8 billion of impact on our local economy, and nearly 50,000 local jobs that I will mention are primarily held by city residents, are sustained by resident spending. Despite the pandemic, we are very proud that Live Baltimore had its most impactful year to date in FY21. I want to thank our incredible staff of only 7 individuals beyond myself who executed every single aspect of our regular programming during both years of the pandemic. By doing this, we realized last year a 40% year-over-year increase in attendance at our programs. This allowed us to ensure that the city benefited fully from the increased demand for housing that was seen nationally and within the region, and that first-time home buyers who were navigating the most competitive market in more than a decade were able to receive expert assistance. We are incredibly grateful to the Scott administration for proposing an increase in the city's investment in our programming in FY23. These funds will allow us to build on the progress that you see on our slide and in the annual report that I've distributed to each of you today. We also want to note, we know that many of you on the council advocated for this increase in support, and for that, we extend our sincere thanks. We are truly grateful. Baltimore City has been losing population since 1950, and this year, when the 2020 census results were released, we learned that for the first time since 1910, our population fell below 600,000 residents. However, we also know from market research that we can reverse our city's decline before the next census if we all work together to do so. So I want to thank and acknowledge members of this committee who enabled that research to show our city's potential to grow a number of years ago. That research has allowed us to create so much optimism and give so many people so much hope about the future of our city. So we are excited to continue exceeding our performance targets in the coming year and to show you all what we can do with increased capacity. So with that, thank you for your time, and I will take any questions.
Thank you. I want to thank you and your staff for, y'all do some wonderful things to really promote Baltimore City too, and with the pandemic that's been going on, and you still were able to see some successes. So that just goes to the work you and your staff have done in housing and their support also. I don't have any questions. Councilman Odette, you have any?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
And thanks for all the work that you do. It's very impressive that, I was on the board of Live Baltimore a while ago. So we had not figured out at the time how to make sure that we knew which purchases were directly as a result of Live Baltimore purchases. And now it sounds like you've got that system. 15% is significant. So that's pretty big. And I think it's probably more, actually. Because, you just, when somebody calls you on the phone and then they go away, they probably use those resources, but you don't even know.
Right.
So I think that's probably more. And I'm also glad that you're working on, some targeted recruiting to get some of our legacy residents back, basically, that had left, because we do know that is what happened. So the increase in dollars, are you going? For some reason, we have zeros on staff here, which I don't understand. But so the increase in dollars, would you be hiring more people as well, or you're just going to be, investing in the marketing?
Yes, thank you for the question. So we will be increasing our number of staff. We're very excited to do that. I believe the reason that it's listed as zero is because the way Live Baltimore is funded is through a grant, and so our employees are not city employees. Right, our employees are not city employees.
Yep.
So we will be, I'm so excited, we're going to be hiring our first full-time community data analyst. We do a tremendous amount of work to analyze the city's housing market and to provide housing market data in real time. Which has been critical to really creating confidence in the market, to telling the true story of neighborhood markets, especially as the market has been so hot. We really want to lift up the fact that homes are being purchased all over the city, not just in some neighborhoods where people think, but really all over the city there's homeownership interest. So we'll be hiring a data analyst to help work on that and to help lead staff, some other agencies, groups who are coming together to talk about population growth. We'll also be bringing on a director level marketing and communications person, so I'm so excited for that. And also a Salesforce administrator, because part of what you mentioned, how we're tracking our customers and how we're tracking our impact, has to do with our Salesforce system that we've had for quite some time, but we're going to be able to really do a better job of tracking our customers and moving people through the sales process, getting them to move into the city. In addition to that, we'll be translating some of our marketing materials into other languages, which we've struggled to do. Our website has always been available in other languages, but we'll be producing some materials in other languages, and we also will be creating some new advertising campaign materials. So we're really just excited to show what we can do with those funds.
Yes, it's really great, because there's so many people that want to move to Baltimore.
Yeah.
Really. The other question I had for you is you recently, it was maybe 2 years ago now, it's all running together, you'll have to excuse me. Your report that basically showed that people want to move here. Mm-hmm. We don't have enough inventory, like good quality inventory. And we saw that in the market, right? I mean, 13, 14 offers on properties. It was crazy. And it's going to slow down, because that's what happens. Yeah. But I would imagine that you've, worked with the commissioner on, based on your research, what are the next sort of wave of neighborhoods, so that we can capture, that market. Is that how you use that data?
Yeah, so I would say we've used that data to talk to folks who might be making investments in housing. So housing developers, other people who might be looking at land. So one of the ways that I think people show an interest in that data is when DHCD has land available. We're able to now say, here's some research that you might use to identify the potential future uses of that land. That's to a benefit of creating more desirable housing. I would also say, I know there have been a number of large projects where conventional wisdom might suggest that there's not a market for housing or townhomes or new construction townhomes in that area. And our studies have been used to help developers get the financing they need to get housing projects done, because they've been able to convince their investors through our research that there is a viable project there.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because when people say, well, there's no market there, I think it's total BS, because people want to move here. People live there already. It's just that we need opportunity and we need investment. So it's really, I'm glad that people are starting to utilize that information to be able to counter that narrative. Because, we shouldn't ever say that there's no market.
No.
It's just not a certain market.
Right.
Right?
People want to live in Baltimore City. They want to live in Baltimore City. They want to live in quality housing, in decent neighborhoods, but they want to live here. And the more that we're able to show people what their options are here, we, have thousands of people fall in love with our neighborhoods because of the work that we do every single year. So it's just such a joy to be able to do that, and it's why the data work is just increasingly important. You were on the board, you understand, but building confidence in the market among the real estate community and the developer community is essential to getting residents buy-in. And the creation of new housing doesn't just attract residents, it retains residents, because we're losing residents to our surrounding counties because of housing product. So it's all wrapped up together, and it's all increasingly a more important part of what we do.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful that we can continue to tell that story, and I know you're working towards it, because as we move forward on all of these new strategies we're doing to have the city acquire vacant properties and then be able to utilize them for housing, we're going to need, the financing, and we're going to need to tell that story. So I'm glad that you're continuing to do that as well. One other question was around, one of the best things about Baltimore is the walkability. I live in Charles Village. We can walk anywhere and get our basic needs. That is not the case in every neighborhood. So in your work around this, are you also trying to promote and work with, Main Streets and others to try to get those commercial corridors going as well? I mean, commercial is not your role. It's BDC or it's Main Streets, but in terms of coordinating.
Yeah, I think the way I might answer that is that we're doing a lot more survey work, so resident surveying, trying to understand why are people choosing housing in our city? Why are they choosing the housing where they're choosing it? And so by sharing out some of that information with some of those other departments that you mentioned, we can help to really paint a complete picture of how we're going to grow and how we can have more businesses and have more jobs, and how housing is economic development and resident attraction is economic development. So I think that's probably how I would answer that question. Walkability is very important to a large portion of the market. There's other portions of the market for which it's not as important. Councilman Dorsey, a lot of people move to the 3rd District because they want the yard. It's like not the most walkable district, ironically. So I think we have something for everyone, whatever you're looking for, whatever your interests are, whatever your needs are. There's a neighborhood for you in Baltimore City, and we want to show that. And we do want to make sure that we're keeping up with what the market wants and helping other agencies to see how they're a part of that. Strategy.
Before I want to kind of dovetail.
Sure.
I know that CEO Al Hutchinson, I have said this to him, this is great, but why are we not promoting neighborhoods through Live Baltimore? We got young people doing some great things in this city. We got hardworking homeowners, renters in this city, and we seem to not get to the heart of what drives this city and its communities. And I would like to see more of the communities and what young people do in the city highlighted through Live Baltimore, because if they just go to Live Baltimore, they might not go to that particular location. They can see that. And Commissioner Hauser know that you know how hard our residents work hard in keeping their property clean it up. But I don't see Live Baltimore doing that. I would like to see that. Highlight the community, highlight our young people, because they're doing some great things in the city. But that kind of platform that they could use could really, when you're talking about Live Baltimore, then people can see different neighborhoods. It's not the same neighborhoods. And I don't see no neighborhoods really highlighted with Live Baltimore. And I would like to see that having more of some attention to it also.
So you mentioned Al Hutchinson, so I want to make sure, sometimes people say Visit Baltimore and Live Baltimore interchange.
But I'm just saying I talked to Al about it. And I think when you're talking about Live Baltimore too, you have neighborhoods, you have young people. So I mentioned it to Al, I mentioned it to you, so I'm just saying we need to highlight that here in the city. We haven't done a lot of that.
I love highlighting neighborhoods and residents. That's what we love to do. We are really proud. LiveBaltimore.com, plug for LiveBaltimore.com, has a profile of every single neighborhood in Baltimore City. All 278 neighborhoods have a profile on that site. We have the opportunity for residents to become neighborhood ambassadors by signing up for an ambassador account on our website. And I'm excited with some of the funding that we will be receiving next year, hopefully, that we can do some more storytelling. We've produced some beautiful videos about schools, about walking your kids to school, beautiful videos about just what it means to live next to a park. There's so many stories to tell, endless stories, and we look forward to telling even more of those in the next year.
Thank you, Councilwoman Odette.
Yeah, thank you. Just another question, I guess, for both the commissioner and for Executive Director Milley. I know you all probably meet every day. Right. So, Commissioner, as we're working towards redeveloping our impact investment areas, what does that partnership look like? You're welcome to use Chum as an example in my district if you'd like, or you can pick a random one in terms of what does that partnership look like?
So I would say that, I can't speak more highly of Annie and her team at Live Baltimore and the collaboration that we have. And it's not just between Live Baltimore and DHCD. I would be remiss if I did not mention that we have like this triangular relationship between Live Baltimore, DHCD, and Director Ryer and the Department of Planning.
Correct, yeah.
And, we're kind of all joined at the hip, and, we're looking at this not just from the impact investment areas, but a key area of collaboration around the middle neighborhoods and our focus areas there as well. Part of this is we have additional funds in the impact investment areas, not just for developer incentives, but we're also going to be looking at the first-time home buyer incentive. We've increased that. We partner on a regular basis with Live Near Your Work with Live Baltimore and that incentive. If we're thinking specifically about Coldstream Homestead Montebello, that will be a key part of our conversation is the outreach with Morgan State on Live Near Your Work, program specific for the Tivoli Triangle. Also Johns Hopkins and expanding their footprint to kind of pick up into that Coldstream Homestead Montebello area as an example. But those are the levels of conversation that we have in collaboration and partnership. So it's not just on population growth and what we need to do to be marketing the city for population growth, but it's also strategy in terms of setting up those meetings, creating those partnerships, and advancing those programs.
Yeah, I would echo that. We work very closely and have for a very long time.
Yes.
Now. So just really lucky to have that collaborative relationship between all three of our agencies, organizations. So much more to come. Just so much good stuff and so many ideas that we're all sharing. We also have meetings with the real estate community, the development community, like I mentioned, so we can talk about investments that are happening. We can explain what an impact investment area is. I mean, we're sort of tag teaming to share that information with our various audiences. The other thing that we're doing, we provide accredited continuing education to the real estate community through the Greater Baltimore Board of Realtors. We teach that class every other month. So, for example, when the first-time homebuyer incentive was just increased, we were able to share that information. We're also able to talk about how there is additional incentive available in the impact investment areas. So we're really getting the word out about those programs, and we're able to do that in real time because of our network. And so it's just really a back and forth tag team, sharing information, getting people excited about projects that are coming. I know, talking about Tivoli, I know I shared that market study with Mark. I know Mark was happy to receive information about the viability of that project, and we hope to provide that to anybody who's looking for it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited about the prospect of what the development can do, but then the outlying ripple effect, which will have a huge impact, I think, in the area, and really any of the areas in which we're investing and you're working, because there's a great story. There's a great story to tell of our city, but each neighborhood as well, which is really exciting. So that's great. That's all for me, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, both of you.
You sure, Councilwoman? Again, Live Baltimore, thank you for all your great things you do in pushing Baltimore out. And this hearing is in recess until 6 p.m.
Thank you.